his histories well enough that he would like that dragon, Lord Willis said. House Toland chose the dragon to commemorate a victory over the Targaryens before Dawn came into the Seven Kingdoms. I imagine King Robert appreciates that story. Tommen's smile was shy, but it came to him quicker than it had in the past. I imagine he would drink to the tale. Willis laughed. That he would, my prince. He invited Tommen to walk with him with a gesture, and Tommen glanced at Myrcella. She nodded for him to go with Willis. She would walk behind with Sir Bywater and let Tommen practice speaking to the heir of a major house. How many houses have female heirs like Lady Valinor? Tommen asked. Only houses in Dorne. In the rest of Westeros, a woman will only be heir until she marries, and then her husband will take the position. And a man may take an heir's name to continue the family name, Tommen said, showing he remembered his lessons. But do the men of Westeros trade fairly with female heirs? Willis sucked air through his teeth, his good humor fading. Many do not, my prince. Then why would Lady Valinor travel with the flying dragon? Many heirs want to know the family business. They will temporarily take roles that are not appropriate to their station to ensure they can run the family once the lord dies, although in this case Lady Valinor will take over for her mother, Lady Nymella, who runs Ghost Hill, their ancestral home. He walked toward the great hall, Tommen dwarfed by his impressive size. Tommen looked up at him. She traded foodstuffs. Could she not get a better price in the Reach, and that would be a much shorter and safer voyage? Myrcella loved that the Mandaelis were so willing to tutor Tommen, and that Tommen seemed to be understanding not only the numbers involved in trading, but the politics as well. She agreed with her brother that something strange was happening, that Dawn was sailing so far from their hot home to trade dried fruits and candied nuts and jars of preserves. The Reach and Dawn have a difficult history full of atrocities, with women raped and cities burned on both sides, Willis said. The Reach is full of those who want more than the gods have given them, and those who resent anyone who has a single gold coin more than them. Myrcella rather thought that characterization was unfair, but the Mandaelis were no friends to the Reach, even hundreds and hundreds of years after their family had been stripped of their ancestral home and driven out by the Gardeners, who feared the wealth the Mandaeli family accumulated. The Gardeners had not been as honorable as the Starks. She suspected the Mandaelis held far more gold than the Starks, and yet Lord Stark had nothing but fondness for the family, and he had even arranged for Lord Wyman to become Master of Coin. Have there been accusations in the previous few years? Tommen asked as they climbed the stairs. No, my prince. Has Dawn sailed to White Harbor often? They come tolerably often, although that only started 3 or 4 years ago, Willis said. Tommen stopped, and his head tilted like he was one of his kittens who had spotted something curious. What happened 3 or 4 years ago? Willis looked down and smiled broadly. That is a mystery that only those from Dawn could solve, and those from Dawn do not easily part with information. It is their greatest trade good, and it would cost more gold than we could afford. However, it is wise of you to notice such patterns, my prince. Tommen blushed and grinned so broadly that his dimples deepened. Willis rested a hand on Tommen's shoulder for a moment before he started climbing again, his breath heavy as they approached the level of their grand hall. Most families had it on the main floor of the keep or castle, but the Mandaelis built their castle on a hill and then built the main hall on a higher level, so the balcony looked over the city and then the storm-tossed sea and all the boats coming into the docks with their white sails and banners snapping in the wind. Newcastle was not as large as the Red Keep or Winterfell, but in some ways, Myrcella thought it was better. Willis paused on the last landing before their destination. It is also possible that she heard you had traveled to White Harbor. The Dawn keep their spies everywhere, and you may have drawn her to the harbor. Me? Tommen was startled. Willis' grin turned sly. A prince of the realm is available to talk to. She could come and judge you for herself. Judge me? Like for? Tommen looked panicked. Myrcella had not thought him aware of the game of marriages, but perhaps he knew more than he spoke on. Not for herself. You are too young, my prince. While Benjen Stark has lowered the age for women to start eyeing men, a woman of Lady Valinor's age wants someone who can father children now. However, she has a younger sister named Lady Tyra who people say is beautiful and kind. But they also say she falls into silences and sometimes has dreams that bother her greatly. I imagine Lady Valinor and her mother seek a good match, someone who might have the ear of the king, but also someone who would be kind to a delicate woman. I don't have the ear of the king, Tommen said softly. You may someday, my prince. Tommen shook his head, and Myrcella silently agreed. When Joffrey took the throne, no one would have his ear, not even their mother. Mother thought Joffrey doted on her, but he doted only as long as she provided something he wanted. That was fair because her favors and her approval only came when Joffrey made their mother the center of his universe. Now that Myrcella had seen happier children, both the Stark and Marndale children, she saw how unhealthy the relationship had grown. Willis smiled sadly and urged Tommen to finish climbing the stairs. Is that why you invited us to visit? Did you want to meet me because of Wyler? Myrcella swallowed a laugh as she thought of shy Tommen with the vivacious, loud Lady Wyler with her green hair. While Myrcella admired the girl and envied her bravery in speaking her mind, Tommen would wither if he were to come home to such a wife, and Garland Tyrell had Winifred's attention, leaving no other Marndale children. Given how Garland and Winifred looked at each other, Myrcella would not be surprised if Lord Wyman and Lord Mace were not already in talks. No, my prince. As you can tell from the wagon of goods your sister sent on to Winterfell, we only thought of the advantage to our merchants. Myrcella laughed. I should invite my mother. Your shops would have no goods remaining. That was assuming that her mother would deign to step foot in White Harbor. Myrcella's father talked about how much he looked forward to traveling to the north for her wedding, but every time, her mother would wrinkle her nose. My merchants would appreciate that, Princess Willis said. He had reached the top of the stair, but then he stopped. Father. Willis, a man's voice said. Myrcella came up the last few steps and saw Lord Wyman Marndale standing in the broad corridor, at least that's who she assumed he was based on the girth. He caught Lord Willis in an embrace. It's good to have you home, father. Willis sounded sincere, even though the return of his father meant that he lost much of his authority. It's good to be home, Lord Wyman said. Then he turned and offered a bow to first Tommen and then Myrcella. My prince, my princess, I am very sorry to carry the bad news to your ears, but the king has died. Myrcella heard the words, but for long seconds, her mind could not make sense of them. Her father. Her father had died. He was too large. Too strong. How? Tommen whispered. An alemaster brewed strong ale incorrectly. His head now decorates a pike in the Red Keep and the alehouse was burned. Your father and several other lords of the realm are gone. Myrcella staggered to the side of the hall and collapsed into a chair. Myrcella. Tommen shouted, and then he was at her side, grabbing her hands. Their father was gone. Their father whose laugh was large enough to fill a room and who would buy them trinkets even if he could never find words of love. Their father was gone. Myrcella could not imagine a world where the Red Keep existed without Robert Baratheon. The rest of the family orbited around her father and he was the permanent, unchangeable rock on which the family stood. Stand back, my prince. Let her get air. Lord Wyman sat on the chair next to her. The realm will miss your father, and I fear without him, men will not keep the king's peace, princess. You and the prince must make a choice quickly because Lord Stark has ordered the north to close. What? Why? Tommen asked. Willis looked equally surprised, so this was not something planned. That meant something had happened unexpectedly. Myrcella had grown up watching her mother and father move around each other. Her mother would aggravate her father so he would rail and shout, and the next day, she would demand an apology by way of silks and lace. Her father would compare her mother to Lyanna Stark's strength or Catelyn Tully's loyalty in order to drive her away, and then he would drink and dance with strange women without his wife's eyes on him. When one of them did something unexpectedly, it was almost always to move the other. Was the same true in the great movements of houses? Myrcella didn't know enough and she dare not leave to talk to Sir Bywater who was, by far, the person most likely to give her honest and uncomfortable truths. Lord Wyman sighed heavily and shifted his large girth in his chair. With so many lords dead, the kingdom is in disarray and Prince Joffrey. Lord Stark fears he will not be able to keep the lords in check. Instability is likely. Myrcella glanced toward Sir Bywater who stood by the wall guarding, always guarding. His expression was grim, so this was likely not an overreaction on the parts of Lords Stark and Wyman. What decision must we make, Lord Wyman? Myrcella asked, her chest aching with the emotions she tried to hold back, at least until she could get to her private rooms. If you wish to return to your mother in the Red Keep, you must set out quickly. There are ships from the Westerlands here who will ferry you home, but you should travel before people become disquieted. Soon, travel will be unwise. We don't have to go home, do we? Tommen asked in alarm. Myrcella opened her mouth, but she didn't know. Do we? She asked Lord Wyman. Just because he posed the option as a choice didn't mean that they had another. You do not, Princess. Prince Tommen, you may stay in the north, but White Harbor would be the first place an invader might look to. You should travel back to Winterfell as quickly as possible. There are no Ironborn on this side of Westeros, Myrcella said, unsure about who would attack such a large and fortified position. Untrue, Princess. Crozai and his ship the Silence have been seen in the Summer Sea and the Narrow Sea. He is fearless and without mercy. Balon is unlikely to rebel again after being put down so recently, but Euron Greyjoy never surrendered. And anyone who might think to rebel would find both you and Prince Tommen valuable hostages. That won't happen, Sir Bywater said darkly, and a shiver went down Myrcella's spine. A knight or lord can die in service to his liege, but he cannot promise safety, Wyman said in a voice that was almost gentle. If you want to stay, take your wagons and your horses and ride north while the roads are still safe. We cannot, Myrcella said. We sent the wagons and half the horses back to Winterfell with supplies for the royal family. Myrcella had loaded it not only with silks and laces and velvets for Sansa to choose for her maiden cloak, but also with preserved fruits and spices and 100 luxuries she'd found at White Harbor that she wanted to share with her new family. Can you lend us wagons? Lord Wyman grimaced. Not for at least a month. Lord Stark has given word to close the neck, so I must send men and supplies to Moat Cailin. I cannot slow the task I was given, even for you, Princess. We understand, Sir Bywater said. When your wagons or ours return, we will move the prince and princess then. So we don't have to go back? Tommen asked, his tone brightening. I will send a raven to Mother, expressing our condolences but saying we will stay. I have a betrothal and you have instruction. Father will want us to honor both. Tommen pressed his lips together, but that was his usual reaction when Myrcella mentioned their father. For some reason, he had never been kind to either of his sons. With Myrcella he had been awkward and more likely to spend coin than invest in kind words, but Myrcella had never doubted her father loved her. She didn't understand why he had struggled so much more with Joffrey and Tommen. Maybe it was because he saw them more as mother's sons than his own. They did take after her so closely that there was little room left for any of father in them. Even now that Tommen was developing as a swordman, Myrcella could not see their father's aggression or power. Tommen was all about grace and speed. He fought more like Arya than the other men. Princess, I regret that I must take my heir from you. We must discuss logistics for how to deploy our men. Then we shall excuse ourselves. Myrcella stood, happy to have any excuse to return to her rooms where she might weep in private. She desperately wished she was in White Harbor right now so she could go to Robb, who would sit with her in some shaded corner of the castle and make her smile. Instead, she had to be the strong one. And she would be until they could get home to Winterfell. Chapter 22. Chapter text. When someone rapped on the door to his suite, Ned moved to open it. He was not surprised to see a half-dozen Lannister guards, hands on the hilts of their swords. He was surprised to see Lord Tywin. Ned stepped backward into the sitting room. Unlike the small chamber he'd been given from the central towers, this room had an ample sitting room to entertain guests, a generous bedroom, and windows that overlooked the guardhouse and training yard, so if he decided to use an alternative escape, he would be spotted immediately. Ned didn't reach for his sword because he had no illusions about how that would end. He needed Tywin to see him as being useful and a minimal danger. Tywin nodded, his expression cold. Good morn. Please hand your sword to Sir Arthur. Ned hesitated. When he'd gotten on the ship with Bronze Yohn, he'd known this was the likely outcome. Still, yielding made his guts knot and he could feel the ghost of a sharp blade ready to cut into the back of his neck. I had thought we would pretend longer. It had been several weeks, but Tywine had kept his distance and allowed Ned an illusion of freedom as he attended funeral services in the Great September and visited the Godswood. But now the game was changing. He had thought Tywine would want him in the audience for Joffrey's crowning, but perhaps he feared what Ned might do. He unfastened the scabbard and handed it to the Westerland soldier. "I fear we are running out of time for pretense," Tywine said. "Come. Sit. Perhaps you can send someone for food and we can break our fast." Ned moved to the table set in front of his window. After sitting, he watched the wariness in Tywine's gaze. "I can hardly fight my way through the Red Keep. I am not fool enough to move against you while I am here. And yet I have heard of the feral rage of Northerners most of my life," Tywine countered. Ned hated playing this game, but play it he would. "Many are feral. If you tried to lock a door on Lord Umber or Tormund, I have no doubt they'd take the nearest piece of furniture and bash anyone they could reach. But Lord Bolton is far more of your nature. He will plot and plan for years. Generations, even. You cannot dress every Northman in the same shirt, any more than every Westerlands man is ruthless enough to kill man, woman, and child to make a point." Tywine waved the guard away. Ned assumed they were just outside the door, ready to answer any cry for help. Tywine would not need them, not against Ned. He could not win this battle with his hands, and if he had to die to leave his family in a better position, he would without complaint. The gods had given him more life than he had a right to. Tywine settled across from Ned. "You speak of Robert's legitimate son, but you did not name Joffrey as that son." "Robert believed Joffrey to be his true heir," Ned said. "However, my beliefs and Robert's have little impact on how the rest of the kingdom acts, and some favor chaos. Believing rumors allows them to sow the seeds of chaos that would benefit them. Is that why the North is closed?" Ned kept all emotion from his face. If the North had closed, then Wyman had reached White Harbor. His family should be safe deep in the heart of the North, so now he only needed to prevent idiot Southrons from killing each other for a cursed throne. "I will not have my family or men dragged into chaos designed by someone's rumors." Tywine sat taller. "Do you believe these rumors are a plot?" Ned knew they were. He suspected Hightower and Dane had arranged them, but he needed Tywine to look in a different direction. "Have you heard of a fellow called Littlefinger Petyr Baelish?" "No." Ned nodded slowly. "He told people in the Vale that he had slept with both Tully girls before their weddings. I know Cat was a maid, so I have every reason to believe Lysa was as well, but he hoped to spread chaos and use that to find who might be weak in their loyalty to the Arryns. He rose so high that Robert asked about appointing him Master of Coin." Tywine tilted his head to the side. "Do you think he would dare spread such a rumor, and how would it benefit him?" "I know not," Ned said. "I do not try to understand dishonest men. In the North, I have a bannerman, Roose Bolton. Bolton wanted to use rape during the rebellion. His family favors flaying. Despite this, he sent his true-born heir south and had him tutored in lute and harp as well as the tilled field." Tywine sat across from Ned and leaned back in his chair. "How would rumors in the Red Keep benefit him? In truth, they may not. However, he needs a wife for his son, one with no brother to inherit her father's keep. But right now, too many lords have sons. A war would change that. Bolton and Baelish and 100 other men might seek to spread these rumors because a stable realm favors those who already have power and instability favors those who want more. Why would Bolton seek a good daughter with lands? He has a castle and lands, greatly expanded lands, after Robert returned the gift to the North." Tywine looked curious rather than obstreperous, so Ned assumed his words were reaching fertile ground. "He fears his lands will be overrun by this unseen enemy in the North, and instead of strengthening his keep and the North as a whole he seeks to place his family in the South where they will be safer, preferably the Vale where land is easily defended. Is this threat to the North that great?" Ned considered his words carefully. He needed Tywine to take his words seriously, and speaking of green seeing or others would not engender trust. Whole towns have vanished, killed down to the last child. I suspect that whoever is moving north of the wall will not risk being exposed until they are ready to move, but any force that can defeat wildlings so handily is a threat to take seriously. They are feral and powerful fighters, yet none survive when our enemy sweeps through. And you have no information on who it is." None. No scout has survived. The only word we have is from scouts who saw them from afar, and they say the movement kicked up so much snow that all they could see was a great cloud that filled the horizon. Tywine took a long breath. The hook was baited. This is why I am unconcerned about whatever conflicts you have. Selfish men will always push the realm toward chaos. You will protect the good name of your daughter's children. One of those children is betrothed to my heir, so I do not begrudge you this effort. I have no interest in the throne or who inherits it. Tywine's gaze was hard. You speak as if you think I must fight to keep Joffrey on the throne. He is the rightful king, the son of Robert Baratheon. Yet Stannis and Renly are absent. The two men who both have claims if Robert died without a son are absenting themselves from King's Landing. You and Stannis are welcome to throw men at one another. I have another war to prepare for. Even this was enough to name Ned a traitor. He was calling the supposed king's legitimacy into question and naming those who might want to deny it. You have sworn allegiance to the throne. If King Joffrey calls the banners, you are obliged to gather a host. If I do, I leave the north vulnerable to whatever enemies wait to sweep down on us. Then you will be trapped between them and the Baratheon brothers. Ned knew Stannis and Renly would never unite, but if he could worry Tywine more, he would. We can move to reinforce the north once the crown is secure. My orders to my heir were to keep all soldiers in the north and work to reinforce the wall. For 300 years, the wall has been neglected and ignored. We now race to feed the brothers in black and rebuild the fortifications before the enemy appears. Tywine's concern vanished under a cold disregard. What could bring down the wall? Nothing, Ned lied. He'd seen in his last lifetime how easily it had fallen. However, it can be scaled, and if enough enemies attack from the south, they can throw open the castle gates. That seemed to make Tywine consider his next words with more care. Either that or he hoped a long silence would unnerve Ned. It would not. What will it take to get your host moving south? Tywine finally asked. A great council. Let Stannis speak in front of all the lords and be told that the throne is not his. He is fond enough of laws that he would accept the ruling. And it would cast doubt on Joffrey for the rest of his reign. He would be the king who had to ask permission to rule because his parentage was in question. Out of the question. Name another price. I would say your host moving north and a full invasion of the lands of Always Winter to confront the enemies of the north, but your men would face bitter cold, a dearth of food and few sources of fuel. You will strain our food and strip resources from our small folk, so for now we must remain as we are. The north will prepare for whatever stalks the far north, and you will need to tend to the throne. You will write and have Jaime, Tommen and Myrcella come to King's Landing, Tywine ordered. Ned assumed that meant he surrendered on the issue of Joffrey's legitimacy. Cersei would have pushed harder. She had pushed harder. But Tywine was much more of a pragmatist and much smarter than his idiot daughter. Ned leaned back in his chair, and this time he used silence as his weapon. I will not, he said after a silence that mirrored the length of the one Tywine had allowed earlier. As long as I am hostage, my word will hold my son in Winterfell, but that is all the boon you will gain from holding me. I could force you to write the letter. Force or forgery will do you no good. I required a vow from my son that he would listen to no orders unless I returned to issue them. Even if I did return to Winterfell and order them to return, Jaime is a man grown. He will not obey when he has no interest in doing so. And Tommen is a prince. His word carries more weight than mine. Tywine snorted. As Joffrey's word carries more than mine, he demanded. Ned allowed a small smile to grace his lips. Children can be led, Lord Hand. However, Tommen has spoken of the harms his brother has done him. He fears him, and I will not force a child to return to a home where he lives in fear. A pretty excuse for holding the crown prince hostage. A truth, Lord Hand. I spoke against you when you called for the deaths of Rhaegar's children, and I will speak against anyone who wants to harm Tommen. He has gold cloaks at Winterfell. He is learning water dancing from a Bravo sea sword master. He takes lessons with my children. He is no hostage, but I will not order him to return to King Joffrey's side. Tywine rubbed a hand over his face. You are quite vexing, Lord Eddard. I am, Ned agreed. As are you. I believe it is the nature of being wardens. We must act for our people, even against our own interests. You could ease your vexation by releasing me to sail north. Or I could free you to ride to Stannis' side, swelling his host with your men. And the north appears to have far more men than I expected. The sort of folk settled at Whale Song would not rise for me if I marched them south, Ned said, and my bannermen are loath to get involved in a fight for a throne they don't care about. I have promised them that I will only ride if it is to a grand council where every lord can put forward an argument and the small folk will be left undisturbed by the march of armies. Which means you have discussed the issue of succession with them. I have refused to discuss the issue, Lord Hand, Ned corrected him. But people are the same everywhere and a good story is one often told. I told my bannermen as I told you, this is an issue for either Southrons to fight over or for lords to debate. I will not march my army south of the Neck for anyone, not Joffrey and certainly not Stannis or Renly, who have clouded the issue of succession between themselves. You may hold me here until I die of age, but that will not change. And if the north falls, you will find a strange enemy has a strong foothold to take all of Westeros. It is convenient that you have such a strong enemy at a time when the true king needs your banners. It is not convenient at all. The men and women of Whale Song are free folk, former wildlings who have agreed to live by some of our rules, but they will not bend the knee. That means I have tens of thousands of men and women in my borders who will not answer my calls. They are not my bannermen. At best, they will fight to protect the land I allow them to live on, but if they seek more land than I grant them, I will have a war within my own borders. In fact, I suspect that some descendant of mine will curse my name for setting up this civil war. But I need fighters, and I refuse to leave women and children to die. If you are telling the truth, your honor is greater than your common sense. Mayhaps Ned agreed. He had stopped allowing honor to dictate his every decision. He would never again warn Cersei of danger out of some fear that her and her children would die. However, honor was still more important to him than this game that Tywin played. I could throw you in the black cells. Ned agreed, his skin crawling at the thought of enduring that again. But to protect his family, he would. He would never trade his freedom or comfort at the cost of his children. You could drag me to the September of Baelor and take my head in front of the crowd. But that would only earn you the enmity of the North and potentially of Jaime himself. The years have softened him, but if you take action against the Lord who sheltered him, he would not soon forgive you. Tywin leaned back in his chair and studied Ned for a long time. His gaze was far more calculating than the one he had worn earlier. And you say you do not play the Game of Thrones? I do not, Ned said. I hope never to see kin on the throne. Ned would do much to keep Jon off it. He loved the boy, and he would not have his kin exposed to the rot and poison of this city. Yet you marry your heir to a princess. When the conflict is over and Queen Cersei can travel north to see her daughter join my son, then I will see my son marry a beautiful and clever woman who is the daughter of my dearest friend. I would want to join my family to Robert's regardless of the throne. So my granddaughter must languish in a frozen hell that you claim is on the verge of being invaded by a powerful and unknown force. She will have a husband who adores her, one who would protect her at all costs, Ned corrected him. You will be kin to the north, and that will keep my bannerman from wanting to remove the new Lady Stark's brother from the throne. Robert was a poor player in the Game of Thrones, but I assume you can see the advantage Myrcella's marriage has brought. That is even without considering the new wealth found in the north. Vexing, Tywin said, his voice more thoughtful. I had thought you would either attack without care or threaten me. Ned thought about how he had charged into the throne room with a document signed by King Robert. He'd tried to arrest Cersei and Joffrey and he'd ended up with a knife to the throat. Northmen appreciate directness. That does not mean we must be fools. Tywin nodded. You are confined to these rooms. I will have maids care for the rooms and bring meals, but there will be guards at all times. I assume the guards will keep Cersei out as well as ensure that I remain where you have left me, Ned said. Tywin laughed. Do you fear a woman? That woman? Yes. She is a fool who believes herself clever. She would bring the King's Guard here and order me beaten or killed all to get her daughter back, and the only result would be freeing Robb from my orders. Then he could march south. Then my bannermen might be more interested in the wars for King's Landing than the danger to the north. The free folk might even march if they felt an obligation to avenge me. I know not how they see their duty. It would not end well for you, the Westerlands or the North, but Cersei would never see that she had set the fire that burned her own house. The first time Ned had lived this life, Tywin had never seemed to truly understand the threat his daughter posed, but now he studied Ned, his forehead creased. I will issue an order that none is allowed other than I or the maids I have chosen. Ned nodded. I will trust my security to your good sense. Tywin stood. Perhaps we can break our fast together on another morn. For now I must return to the small council. They had hoped to hear that you would bring your bannermen south. They had hoped that I was fool enough to leave the north without issuing orders to my heir. Tywin pursed his lips. They did. And they hoped that my reputation would be enough to encourage you to write a missive ordering your bannermen to the king's side. I am sorry to disappoint you. Tywin studied Ned. If you are correct about an enemy to the north, I would rather have an ally who can plan appropriately. Ned nodded his head toward Tywin. I wish you well in your wars, Lord Hand. Ned wondered how this would change the war. He suspected that Stannis would still kill Renly. And if Tywin learned that Jon was in Essos with Arthur Dayne, Ned was going to lose his head again. He just hoped he had done enough to leave his family in a better place this time. Tywin left, and Ned looked around at his new prison. It was significantly better than the black cells, but something still crawled under his skin at the idea that he was trapped here. He had once died here. Sansa had suffered. Arya had starved. His whole household had their heads mounted on spikes. He would rather face others than the faded ghosts in this place. But the gods had given him this chance and he was no craven to avoid his own fears at the cost of others. Chapter 23. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Jon held tightly to Arthur's hand as the cart bumped and jolted across the uneven stones of Tollus. Clea had ridden ahead, so he could only hope they had Maestus waiting for them. Sir Oswell. Daenerys stood at the front of the cart hanging onto the rail with one hand and her huge belly with the other. Sir Oswell. Open the gates. Jon could not take his eyes from Arthur. It was Arthur who helped raise him. It was Arthur who had sat under the weirwood trees and explained life to him in terms that were far more blunt than his father. Benjen Stark had sheltered him and created a safe place for him as a child, but it was Arthur who had pushed him to stand on his own 2 feet and to be a man. And now Arthur was pale and his thigh smelled of rot and Jon could do nothing. The gates opened and Sir Arthur looked up at Jon through slitted eyes before smiling. I can turn you over to your new Kingsguard now. No, Jon said. I do not release you. You have to stay with me. With Sergerold gone, you are the natural choice to be the commander of the Kingsguard, so you must stay to take command. Sir Oswell will serve you well. Arthur winced as he reached for Jon, patting his knee. Hot tears ran down Jon's face and he wanted nothing more than to refuse this reality. Old friend, what trouble have you gotten yourself into this time? Sir Oswell stood at the side of the wagon, his face lined with worry. Arthur chuckled, his voice low. We should have died with Prince Rhaegar, so any years we've enjoyed since then have only been a very long and sweet dessert to a bitter meal, one I have savored to the end. Arthur tightened his fingers around Jon's knee, and Jon looked at Sir Oswell helplessly, silently begging him to have some solution. Went's gaze skittered away from Jon and he turned to the other 3 men in the wagon. Mine is a simple wound, already healing, one of the archers said. I can walk easily enough. He climbed from the wagon and Rion, a guard, followed. He'd lost a finger and the wound was not healing, but it was not rotting either. Went called for guards to help the last man, an archer who, during the Dothraki battle, had been struck in the back so hard that he was still bruised and he had trouble moving his lower limbs. After they were gone and Daenerys stood beside the wagon, Went climbed in. It's just like you, old friend, to leave me to do the bulk of the work. Arthur reached for Went, and they gripped each other by the forearm. Serve him well, Arthur said. Always. He is my king, and I will see him on the Iron Throne if I must kill every Lannister between here and the Red Keep. Arthur let out a long and shuddering breath. Milk of the poppy, he asked softly. Sir Oswell called to someone outside the cart, and a woman rushed over with a vial. He is so weak, Jon protested. If Arthur drank, he would not wake. Jon's father, his Stark father, had explained medicines well when Castle Lyanna began to produce headache powders. He showed how any medicine becomes poison if used with a heavy hand or when the patient was weak. "It's the only kindness we have," Sir Oswell said. Instead of taking the vial and adding drops to his water skin or even placing a drop on Sir Arthur's tongue, he held the whole vial to Arthur's lips, his hand slipping behind Arthur's head to tilt it up to meet the medicine. Arthur swallowed. Jon's head ached, and his chest was tight. The tears ran over his cheeks as he held Arthur's hand as tightly as he could. "Rest well, my friend," Sir Oswell said. He bowed his head and Jon watched helplessly as Arthur took 3 more breaths. A 4th was slow and laboured. A 5th barely moved his chest at all. And then he was still. Sir Oswell rested his hand on Arthur's eyes, closing them fully. "You served well, and I will ensure that your many deeds are recorded in the White Book," Oswell whispered. He cleared his throat and turned to one of the servants and Dothraki gathered around the wagon. He seemed surprised by either their number or their composition. The Dothraki looked out of place on this street of manors and trees, but they stood with Daenerys, 73 riders who honored her enough to stop raping. "Sir Arthur's bones must be prepared. Please send someone to the city center, the White Temple." Oswell unbuckled the scabbard from Arthur's side and pulled the sword of mourning away from his body before placing it on Jon's knees. "Your Grace, the sword should be returned to the Danes." With his free hand, Jon rested his free hand on the sword. Right now, he could not care about the sword or the family. He cared about a good man that had been taken from this world because of human stupidity. He wished he had been the one to put a dagger in the savage's cock, but he'd been exiled to a distant hill to watch, helpless. "Your Grace, let us get inside," Sir Oswell said. Jon wanted to be a child, to throw a fit and demand that the world be fair. But it wasn't. The greatest swordsman to ever come out of Westeros had fallen to fools whose only strategy in battle was an insane lack of fear. There was no fairness in that. Jon looked up and saw Dany's 3 blood riders watching him, the other Dothraki spread out behind them. Dany was watching him too, her expression full of sympathy. He could accept it from her. She had seen Sir Gerald fall to the same monsters. Arthur always spoke of how the Dothraki were no threat to Westeros, that they had no skill to challenge the military technology strategy of those great lords, or the armor of individual knights. He said he would like to see a Dothraki charge broken on a shield wall or gutted by pikes. But the Dothraki had now taken 2 of the Kingsguard, 2 men renowned for their talent and skill. Jon forced himself to let go of Arthur's warm hand. He brushed his damp cheeks with the back of his fingers and reminded himself of all Arthur's lessons about emotional control. He took a deep breath and sat up straighter. "I will return the sword along with Sir Arthur's bones and a letter acknowledging all the service that he has provided our family." The letter would have to wait until it was safe to declare himself. No doubt King Robert had already heard that Arthur was in Essos, but Jon had to remain unnoticed if he wanted to keep his Stark family safe. Jon stood and looked down at Arthur as he lay in the cart. His hands were no longer curled into fists and his body carried no strain. "It is good," one of Dany's blood riders said to him in Low Valyrian, a trading language Arthur had taught him right next to the High Valyrian that Jon, as a young boy, had always scoffed at having to learn. He'd even appealed to his father to get them out of such lessons, but Benjen had sided with Arthur. "What is good?" Jon asked, fully prepared to kill Dany's blood rider if he suggested that Arthur's death was in any way justified or desired. The blood rider's horse danced uneasily. "It is good to have a son to cry over our bodies so that the great stallion sees how our herd loved us." He thumped his own chest. "You honor your father." He pulled his bladed weapon out and raised it in the air before giving an undulating cry, and the other Dothraki followed. Their cries filled the street, and Jon saw townspeople skitter away, running into houses and slamming their doors. Jon supposed Arthur had been a sort of father. How many fathers was Jon going to collect in one lifetime? How many would he lose? Arthur's death made it clear that anyone could fall in war, and one's skills did not guarantee victory. Maybe Rhaegar had even been better than Robert. Maybe his foot had slipped on the mud. Maybe he had spared a thought for whether or not his northern love had given birth yet. A million things could have happened to ensure that the best swordsman came out the defeated one. "He was a great man," Daenerys said softly. "They honor him." Jon climbed over the edge of the wagon, the sword of mourning still in his hand. It was lighter than he had expected. In all the years he had trained with Arthur at Castle Lyonesse, Arthur had never shown him the sword, and carrying it now felt sacrilegious, as if the old gods of the Rhoynar watched him and judged him unworthy. Laena! Daenerys shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. The old woman stood at the courtyard's door and opened her arms. Dany threw herself forward, sobs racking her body as she held the old woman, and Laena clung to her in return, petting her long hair and whispering so low that Jon could hear no words. "What are your orders, your grace?" Sir Oswell asked. Jon blinked. Arthur played at calling Jon king, but he had made their plans. He had decided they would go to Dorne next, revealing his identity to the One Kingdom, sure to keep his secret once they knew Rhaegar had not dishonored their kin in marriage. Arthur would have decided when they were to leave. He would have decided if they brought the entire staff or kept a manor somewhere for an easy retreat. Now Sir Oswell looked to him. Arthur's plan relied on Prince Doran's willingness to forgive Prince Rhaegar and Jon for their unwitting parts in Princess Elia's death. Jon did not have the same faith in them that Arthur did, and without Arthur here, he was loath to put his Stark family in danger. So Jon needed to get information, and he had to move slowly and quietly. He looked back at Arthur's body. He wanted to run straight home to Castle Lyonesse and throw himself into the arms of his last remaining father and hang on while Benjen promised to fix everything. But he was a man. He could not do that, and he would not put his family in danger. If that meant he remained in exile until the Baratheon legacy failed, then so be it. If it never did, if his uncle Ned never called for a grand council, then Jon had to decide what life he wanted. He would not start a war, not for a chair. Better to rule a kingdom the size of a manor than condemn others to die as their wounds rotted. Jon took a deep breath. "We need to find quarters for all the staff. Daenerys's bloodriders should remain near her. And I need all current information on the state of politics in Westeros." Sir Oswell looked at him for a moment, a sad smile on his face before he bowed his head. "Of course, your grace. Laena and I will arrange everything." He turned to the old woman, and she tightened her hold on Daenerys's for a moment before nodding and offering her own of course, of course. Oh. Dany was tired of watching her nephew haunt the corridors and courtyards. She knew how much guilt she felt knowing that Hightower had died in a vain attempt to save her. She knew how much Viserys suffered, seeing the mother who loved and protected him die. She could not imagine what Jon was feeling losing Arthur, who had both raised him and died to protect him. The grief flowed from him like a fog, and Dany found herself seeking Viserys. Even his madness was preferable to their nephew's pain. Daenerys did not find him in his rooms or even in the wing of the house where his bedroom was. Maybe her bloodriders had frightened him into seeking some unoccupied corner of the manor. She started toward the back of the manor where the kitchens were. Sometimes Viserys liked to steal sweets and tell stories about being a child in the Red Keep and how he would spoil his dinner by convincing the cooks to give him puddings. Dany hoped he was having one of the days where he lost himself in those good memories. She started toward the stairs, but then stopped and turned to Aggo. "Blood of my blood, I would ask you to wait here while I seek my brother." Aggo moved closer, his hand reaching as though he would touch her belly before he pulled it back. "Your time for battle approaches. You cannot fight your own war and protect yourself if some danger comes to you from out here," he argued. Dany did feel safer for having her bloodriders. Their loyalty soothed the deep fears that chased her at night when she remembered the day of her kidnapping. It was strange it was Dothraki who took her, and her bloodriders might have even been part of that horde, and yet it was Dothraki who made her feel safe. She rested her hand on his shoulder. "Blood of my blood, I trust your arm, and the strength of your arm gives me great comfort, but I am safe here. If I call, men will leap to my defense." She pulled her hand back and rested it on her stomach. "The dangers that I have to face are ones that you cannot protect me from. I must fight some battles myself, so I ask that you respect that I must find my brother myself." He took a step back and lowered his gaze, clearly ceding to her request. Dany smiled. Perhaps outsiders thought men had all the power in Dothraki culture, but unlike the Westeros nobility who had rejected a princess they had sworn to uphold in favor of a weak boy and his grasping Hightower grandfather, the Dothraki honored their vow to her. It made her feel stronger. Dany sought her brother in the kitchens and the high-ceiling halls and offices, but she didn't find him. She moved to the back of the house where there was a second courtyard adjacent to the stables. Viserys always complained about the smell of horse and disliked even the cats that crept into the manor in search of mice, but surprisingly she found him working feverishly on the cobblestone of the back courtyard. "Brother! What are you doing?" Viserys whipped around, his hair clumped and greasy, and the smile slipped Dany's face. "Brother! Have you seen him?" Viserys clutched two small bundles of wood in his hands. "Seen who?" Today was not a good day. Not only had Viserys slipped from sanity, but it was to be one of his dark moods. "I know you've seen him. He thinks to take my throne." Viserys turned his back and stalked over to the woodpile. It was normally a neat wall of firewood stacked against the stone stable, but it had been pulled down so that logs tumbled across the cobblestones and were heaped into a small hill. Viserys shoved bundles of twigs between the logs, taking time to arrange the wood to whatever exacting pattern he had in his misinformed mind. "What throne? We have no throne, Viserys." He whirled around and waved his finger as if it were a sword that he would threaten her with. "I am the true king of Westeros," he shouted before he leapt off the wood he clambered onto. He rushed to the door leading into the stable, grabbing handfuls of straw and returned to the mound. "You are not," Daenerys said. "You are the Lord of Dragonstone." "I am the Lady of Dragonstone. That is our ancestral seat and we will reclaim it." She would not confuse him with dreams that they could be royals again if Jon took the throne. "No," Viserys shouted as he stuffed straw into the gaps in the wood. Daenerys stepped closer, and she recognized the musk of cooking oil. Horror filled her as she spotted the cracked clay jugs tossed among the wood and the oil-darkened wood. "Viserys, what are you doing? You should come back to your rooms. You should rest. It is the heat of the day, and you will exhaust yourself." She took another step forward, and that's when she realized Viserys had taken the 3 eggs. She was staring at the eggs so intently that she didn't notice when he leaped forward and grabbed her wrist, jerking her closer to the wood. "He is not a dragon." "Who?" Dany asked, although she knew. She just needed to delay Viserys, to distract him. "The bastard. The bastard would take my throne. He is a Blackfyr. He will not take my throne." "Are you talking about Jon?" Dany noticed movement along the upper balcony. "He is a bastard Stark. He is the usurper's dog. He will die in fire and blood like everyone who stands against our family," Viserys shouted. "Princess." Sir Oswell came out of the house, his hand on his sword, but when he took a step forward, Viserys jerked her closer to the wood and reached for a lit torch set into the stable wall. "Sir, stay back. My brother is greatly confused and he has soaked the wood with oil." Fear gnawed at her. She knew Viserys would never intentionally hurt her, but the story of Aerion Targaryen haunted her. He had drunk wildfire believing he would transform and had died screaming. It did not take a deadly intent for an action to be fatal. "I will hatch dragons. I will hatch dragons and they will burn the world, and they will burn that bastard first. You are mine. You are not his. You will not marry a bastard and put bastard Targaryens on my throne." "I will not marry Jon," Daenerys agreed. "You saw the grief it caused our mother having kin marry. Helaena and Aegon, Rhaenyra and Daemon, Aegon the Unlikely and Rhaena. How many times has keeping the dragon blood strong caused misery? You will marry kin. You will marry me," Viserys screamed in her face, the spittle hitting her skin. "I will kill that horselord scum that grows in your belly and I will put good Targaryen babes in there. Maybe I can cut it out rather than wait for it to be born." "Viserys!" Laena cried. She was hobbling as fast as she could, clinging to her cane as she came far closer than Sir Oswell dare. Daenerys saw Jon behind her, hiding in the shadows, which was wise considering the sight of him might lead Viserys to do something insanely foolish. "Tell them, Lady Laena," Viserys said. "Tell them that I am the king of the 7 kingdoms. Me. I am the last blood of the dragon. Me. Not some bastard." Laena's gaze flicked toward the torch, and Viserys lifted it high. "Tell them." He screamed, his grip on Dany's wrist tightening. "Viserys, you are the blood of the dragon," Laena said. "Let her go. If you wish to hatch your dragons, that's fine. You may. But let your sister go." She reached out her wrinkled hand toward Daenerys, and Dany wanted to reach back, to take comfort in those hands that had held her so often as a child, but Viserys tightened his hold on her, wrapping his arm around her waist. Worse, not Oswell or Jon or any of her blood riders would be able to save her because Viserys and his torch were right next to the oil-soaked wood. Daenerys would have to throw herself backward and pray Viserys loosened his hold before the flames could take her, but she knew she was about to be burned badly. Maybe fatally. "Tell them to make me king," Viserys ordered Laena, his voice ragged and his breath coming so fast it sounded as if he had been running. He was losing his battle against madness, and Dany could see no escape. Her own horror was reflected on Sir Oswell's face, and she was sure she would be able to see the same on Jon's if he were not in shadow. Laena's expression hardened. So like a Targaryen male to demand and demand and demand and never look at what his demands cost. Laena spat. Her words startled Viserys so much that for a moment his hold loosened. Dany shifted her weight to escape at the first moment it was possible. "We are the blood of the dragon. You are the blood of cruelty," Laena snapped. How many Targaryen males ripped the family apart? How many stupid Targaryen males have sat on the throne? How many cruel Targaryen males? How many unforgivable Targaryen males have called themselves king? It was always the Targaryen women who held the realm together. Vitriol dripped from Laena's words, and Dany was startled out of her fear. She continued while Viserys stared at her blankly. "It was your mother who would soothe the lords behind King Aerys back. It was your mother who would pay the Wergeld for wives and daughters who were dishonored in his bed, even when it was her own dear companions who were so dishonored. It was your mother who would soothe your father's insane ramblings, yet when your father was all but lost to his own madness, the kingdom would not make R'hllor the regent. They would not allow a queen to rule because they are all too noble to accept a woman on that throne. They deserve what they get with Targaryen kings because they insist on overlooking Targaryen queens. Now let your sister go. Hatch your cursed dragons. Then leave. Be gone. Your mother would look at you and see only madness and foolishness, but Daenerys is mine. She is the Targaryen who will save the name." Laena had been inching forward with each hateful word she spat, and now she was close enough that she grabbed Dany's hand. But Laena was not strong enough to pull her away from Viserys, and the flame of the torch was far too close. Dany was now the rope the other two pulled on, Viserys on her waist which was now cramping from either fear or the pressure of his hand, and Laena holding her wrist. "Viserys, the fire is a danger to us as well as Laena. We should move away. Throw the torch from a distance and let the eggs burn. Let them hatch," Daenerys said in her most soothing voice, even as a ripple of cramping traveled over her belly. "No. We are the blood of the dragon. We will not burn." "Many Targaryens have burned," Daenerys argued. "You told me of how Rhaenyra burned, many times. As children, we both burnt our fingers grabbing treats from the fire too quickly. More than our fingers will burn if you drop that torch." "No," Viserys smiled beatifically. "I've had dreams. I see us in the fire, rising from it, you and I holding hands with dragons about us. We shall be the rise of a new Targaryen empire." "No. We will burn alive," Daenerys said. Archers now stood on the second-floor balcony, their arrows notched, but even killing Viserys would not save them this close to such a prodigious source of fuel. "My visions are not visions, you fool," Laena said, and her words carried an infinity of hate. "Do you really think I would let them sacrifice one more Targaryen woman to serve her male kin? You do not have visions, you have poison-stained sleep. I made sure they would not dare to match you with your sister because you are not worth her. And I showed them that. I showed them the madness that lay just under your skin. And you, child," Laena said as she turned her gaze to Daenerys with hopeless rage in her eyes. "Women rule the Dothraki. Why did you return? You could have claimed your own status. You could be one of the rulers of their entire culture. You could have taught them better and built something on the grass sea. That child that would have made you a powerful leader among them, and now it will only mark you as dirty to these judgmental men who believe a woman's worth lay in her womb. A woman who cannot carry is trash to be discarded. I wanted you to crown yourself as their queen." Daenerys couldn't breathe. All that time afraid with Khal Drogo's weight pinning her to the ground, watching slave girls suffer and children die. The architect of all that suffering was the one woman Dany had yearned for more than any other. the woman who'd sung lullabies to her and taught her letters. She stared at Lena, not recognizing that woman in this rage-filled face. "She will not take my throne," Viserys shouted, and then all three of them were tilting forward, thrown off balance by Viserys' lunge toward the oil-soaked wood. Daenerys screamed, but her belly was so heavy that she could not escape or fall away from the fire. Lena's cane clattered to the cobblestones, and she followed them into the pile just as the torch touched the wood. The hay immediately sparked and flared. Men screamed. Boots rang as men ran across the courtyard, but then everything was fire exploding around her. Viserys screamed, and Dany felt her brother's arm slip away, the texture of his skin like melting wax beneath her hand. The fire danced and coalesced into 14 spots that surrounded her, most of them dying. One after another the flames vanished, but as each disappeared, one flame grew taller and higher, and from that flame soared up a stunted dragon, its body heavy and deformed. It ran toward her, and then the dragon became a wolf, and then more creatures ran from the flame. Wyverns became flightless dragons, became giant wolves, and wolves became deformed and lopsided dragons that tried to soar only to wheel in tight circles, their wings too misshapen to give them true flight. The creatures cavorted wildly, their fangs bared, but then the flame turned blue and a blue rose blossomed from the center. All the dragons and wolves stilled as a great horn sounded in the distance. A red spire rose out of a plain, the mountains in the distance echoing with the sound of that horn, and a great black dragon rose from the spire. It dwarfed the poor deformed things that masqueraded as dragons, and his amber-red eyes found Dany. She fell into them the way one would fall into a deep cool pool on the hottest of days, and the pool became a sea with waves that buffeted her. But then white ash fluttered to the ground and white swirls surrounded them. The black dragon's eyes turned green, and it grew larger and larger until the beast struggled with each downstroke of its wings to keep its massive body in the air. Finally, the effort was too much, and the great black dragon crashed into the fire. The one remaining flame of the 14 burst into life and exploded around her so that she stumbled away from the heat. Small claws grabbed at her, and Daenerys looked down to see tiny dragons crawling on her. These were not the deformed beasts that had come from the blue flame, but they were not the great mounts of her ancestors either. The tiny beasts climbed up her naked body, and when they reached her shoulders, Dany realized that her hair was gone. She stepped back, away from the heat. And then she stepped back again and again, searching for an escape from the ash and flame until she stepped into sunlight, cool stones under her feet and a great pile of wood with glowing embers in front of her. Daenerys turned around, and Jon was there, and Sir Oswell. Her blood riders were there, and the household guards. Loud chirps distracted her, and she looked to the side to see a tiny black dragon clinging to her shoulder and crying. She turned to her other shoulder where a brownish-red dragon and a beautiful white one clung to her. Daenerys didn't know if she was still dreaming or perhaps dead, but then her stomach cramped and liquid poured out between her legs. Red against the cobblestone. Daenerys passed out. Notes. I'm sorry. I'm trying to make this world happier, but I'm starting with GRM. It's not easy, and I'm really sorry he died. It's just not plausible that they would only lose the red shirts when fighting the Dothraki. And now Viserys can rest without being tortured and without having his name dismissed as one more mad Targaryen. Chapter 24. Chapter text. Myrcella woke in the middle of the night, her heart pounding as someone grabbed her arm. What? Who? A young woman hovered over her, a stub of a candle in a lantern in one hand. Princess, you must get up quickly and dress. Myrcella blinked sleep away and looked at the maid, whose face was twisted with fear. What's going on? The maid hurried to the armoire and pulled out a traveling dress before coming back to the bed. Lord Wyman calls for you, but you must be dressed. The maid started pulling at her nightdress, and Myrcella allowed herself to be stripped down to her small clothes before she pulled on the plain dress. Where's my brother? A dresser has gone to see to him. We must move quickly. Why? What's going on? Where's my guard? All this commotion should surely have pulled one of her guards to her side, even if it wasn't technically proper. Sir Bywater had made it very clear that if security contradicted propriety, then propriety could be hanged, as he liked to say. They are holding the gates, the maid said as she laced the loose corset. She didn't even properly secure the ends before she retrieved Myrcella's shoes. Holding the gates. From whom? The maid's panic seeped into Myrcella's soul, and while the maid worked the buttons on one riding boot, Myrcella started working the buttons on the second. Luckily, the traveling dress was much less restrictive than something more formal, allowing her to bend down. Attackers. We are to get you and the prince into the family hall. Myrcella sucked in a startled breath and leapt to her feet with only half the shoe buttons done. Lead away, she said. She had no doubt that her clothing took longer than Tommen's, so he would be ready. If there was danger, she had to get him to safety. The maid retrieved the candle from the nightstand and hurried into the hall, turning toward Tommen's room. Myrcella followed, her heart pounding painfully hard. A door opened, and the maid stopped so fast that Myrcella ran into her back. Before she could panic, a boy of 10 or so appeared in the hallway, and Tommen followed. Myrcella, do you know what's happening? Tommen rubbed sleep from his eyes. Only that someone has attacked and our guards are holding the gates. The maid whispered, desperation clear in her voice, we have to hurry. She ushered them down a short hallway. But instead of going to the top of the castle where the views would be best and the breezes cleanest, she led them down. At first, Myrcella feared they were being betrayed, but the weapons hung on the wall memorialized the great leaders and heroes of House Mandaeli. She should not be surprised that a northern house would place the family in a lower level where winter could be held at bay, but sometimes her brain still assumed that every castle functioned like the Red Keep, that every lord behaved like her father. She wondered if their father's death was in any way related to this attack. She tended to assume that coincidence was manipulation with an unseen manipulator, just like she assumed that it was manipulation that all of the fine fabrics had been claimed before Sangza wanted to make her maiden cloak. However, Myrcella had no idea who would attack them. The realm was at peace. The maid reached a large double door carved with fish and mermaids. The wood was greyed with age and the hinges made with heavy black iron. When the door opened, Myrcella expected to see a private solar or small reception hall. Instead, it was the Lord's bedchamber. Shock left her unable to move forward. Lord Wiman was sitting, both feet on a stool as a servant fitted shoes to him. Good, good. You're here. I had not anticipated putting you in the middle of the realm's most recent troubles, but we must speak. The men who have come fly Lannister colors, but I cannot say with certainty that they are your mother's kin. Surely no one would risk Lord Tywin's wrath by flying false colors, Myrcella said. Their mother had told them many stories of her father's greatness and his terrible retribution when others challenged him. Myrcella had only vague memories of the man herself, but the glee with which her mother described his cruelties and the songs that were sung about his destruction of entire families made her believe that he was a fearsome lord indeed. Lord Mandaeli took a sword that his page handed him and slid it out of the scabbard to check the edge. They may be Lannister soldiers. I know not. But I do know that the kingdom stands on the brink of war. Your uncle Stannis has published to the realm that both your brothers are bastards. How dare he? Myrcella snapped. That is treason. She put an arm around Tommen's shoulders and pulled him close as if to protect him from such vile words. Lord Mandaeli grimaced. Princess, there are rumors that your mother was most unhappy that you took after your father. They say that she cursed your coloring. Myrcella looked away, tears threatening even though that was a pain she had long ago decided she cared not about. Many girls had mothers who cared little about daughters. The page who had been fastening Lord Mandaeli's boots finished, and the Lord stood. The rumor is that your uncle Tijet fathered Joffrey and that your cousin Lancel fathered Tommen. I care not if this is a vile rumor spread by Lord Stannis to gain power or whether this is truth. The North will not stir for any reason other than a grand council. However, the rest of the realm prepares to fight. The Stormlands are split between Lord Renly and Lord Stannis, with most favoring the former. The Reach and Dawn are silent. The Westerlands and the Crownlands hold for Joffrey. Holster Tully claims the Riverlands will wait for a council, but word is that his son favors Renly. The Vale is deadlocked. Jon Arryn is old and unable to control his lords. Some wish to stand for Joffrey, but Bronze Yohn Royce argues the boy is unworthy of the throne and likely not a legitimate son. Some push for him to back Stannis, but the Vale is in too much disarray to support anyone at this time. He had given her so much information that Myrcella couldn't sort it well enough to ask a coherent question. But why? She stopped, unable to focus on one thought. When had the world fallen into madness? Why had it fallen into madness? Why would her own uncle speak of her brothers in such vile terms? Princess, Lord Marndeily said, we must know if you would go with these Lannister men or if you would return to Winterfell. Tommen spoke before Myrcella could. We already said we would rather return to Winterfell. The choice is ours, right? He sounded frightened, and Myrcella tightened her arm around his shoulders. Myrcella knew what he was thinking. If they went back to the Red Keep while Joffrey was king, neither of them would be safe. He was a cruel boy, but was it possible that he was not her father's boy? It was true that Tommen and Joffrey did not favor their father, but could not a child favor his mother? Robb had the beautiful deep red hair of the Tullys even though his father was a Stark. Myrcella frowned. Robb also had the long face of Stark, and while his mother's eyes were the blue of a bright summer day, Robb's were the blue of winter with grey clouds staining the color. Lord Stark existed in Robb's face. Tommen's round face lacked any of the virile strength or squareness or a Baratheon. His slight build looked like their mother or even Sir Jaime, both of whom had a lankiness that contrasted a Baratheon's stoutness. Tommen did not just favor their mother, he was a near copy of her every feature. And if this rumor were true, people would kill him to keep him from the throne. Even the suspicion was enough for many, she thought. Those who worshipped the 7 hated bastards, and she knew they would die before kneeling to one. Will we be safe in the north? Myrcella asked. Maybe it was a fool's quest to trust the word of a lord as faithful to Stark as the Marndaelis, but she judged herself an excellent judge of who might be lying to her. Absolutely, Princess, Lord Marndeily said. Lord Stark was very clear that there was no way to prove the parentage of your brothers one way or the other, and a great council was the only way to solve this conflict. The North will not involve themselves in any southern politics. And you are our future Lady Stark. Your safety and the safety of your brother are secure, no matter who claims that throne. Whether Stannis or Renly or Balon from the Iron Islands sits, it makes no difference to the North. You're safe. Lord Marndeily had spoken to Lord Stark about her brother's parentage. And from the sounds, Lord Stark had not defended her mother's honor or her brother's parentage. Her mouth was dry as she considered what that meant. No need for power would motivate him to suggest such things, which meant they were likely true. Myrcella looked down at her little brother, at his bright green eyes so full of fear. For a second, she was disgusted at the danger that her mother had put them all in, but then she decided it didn't matter. Tommen was her brother either way, and she loved him. She would always love him. Part of her might even love Joffrey, although that emotion was far more strained. A small traitorous part of her whispered that going to Winterfell would give the Starks unrivaled power. No one had questioned her parentage, so that might make her the only uncontested and legitimate child, and she was betrothed to Robb Stark. But she refused to allow herself to think in those terms. The Starks did not chase power the way most people in Myrcella's life did. And she was a woman. Women could not inherit the Dance of the Dragons had proven that, and Robb's responsibilities were to Winterfell. Surely he would not abandon his people for the Red Keep, especially when he loathed the place. And if Myrcella returned to King's Landing, her mother would arrange a more advantageous marriage, something in the south that involved great gifts of gold and treasures. Willis Tyrell was still unwed. Her father never would have approved such a match, but Myrcella could imagine her mother seeking that very alliance. A few years ago, Myrcella would have approached such an arrangement with the equanimity expected of a royal princess who would marry at her parents' behest, but she'd been promised to Robb. She had given her heart to him, and she would not allow herself to be snatched away by a cynical ploy for money. We will return to Winterfell, Myrcella said as loudly as she could, with her throat dry and her chest constricted. See them out the family passage, Lord Marndeily ordered the maid. I shall go down and try to talk to the soldiers. Arrows have been exchanged, but men who are brave in the absence of a lord will often yield in the presence of one. I will tell them that you and Tommen have gone. He buckled his sword belt around his impressive girth and started toward the door. Tommen retreated to a spot behind Myrcella, all of the courage he had found in the previous months having fled in the face of this danger. Lord Marndeily stopped beside Myrcella and rested his hand on her shoulder. You will be safe and Winterfell, Princess. The North has never forgotten of a vow, and when Lord Robb took you as his betrothed, he promised to protect you. Myrcella frowned. Lord Robb. Should you not say that Lord Stark will protect us? Has not Lord Stark returned to Winterfell? She understood the importance of reinforcing the north for the coming winter, but surely the Warden of the North needed to return to his castle if events were so dire. Lord Wiman's hand tightened on her shoulder. Lord Tywine now stands as the hand of the king, and he has refused to give Lord Stark permission to leave the Red Keep. Lord Stark ordered me to return north and carry word to his family that the north was to remain closed despite his being held hostage against their cooperation. Myrcilla's stomach twisted so hard that for a moment she thought she might be ill. Lord Tywine was now hand of the king. Lord Tywine who earned his fame slaughtering families. Lord Marndeali patted her shoulder. Now, I must go try to talk to these brigands at my walls. The family tunnels will take you to a distant stable. You and whatever guards can reach you before the moon rises must travel hard for Moat Caitlin. It is the closest reinforced position, and they will have soldiers enough to escort you to Winterfell. Now go. Lord Marndeali strode out of the room, and the moment he was gone, Myrcilla felt bereft of his strength and presence. As long as he was there, she could imagine that he would solve any problem, but now it was her responsibility, one she didn't want. She looked at the maid. Lead us, she ordered as she lifted the hem of her traveling skirt with one hand and caught Tommen's hand with her other. The family tunnels were hidden behind an armoire, rough cut, and narrow, more an emergency escape than any regular part of the castle. There were no torches lining the wall or places to sit. There were only uneven rough steps down, and both her and Tommen stumbled several times as they hurried to follow the maid. The darkness and the silence were so absolute that Myrcilla almost felt as if she'd been buried alive, but she hurried on. After a number of minutes, a point of light came hurrying toward them from the far end of the tunnel. It was a boy in rough cloth who carried the stench of horses. Lannisters have taken the stable, he called once they were close to one another. The maid gasped. And the hidden door is still hidden. My brother made sure of it, shifting hay in front, the boy promised. The maid was breathing fast and the hand that held the candle shook. Does the tunnel go anywhere else? Myrcilla asked. No, my lady, the maid said. So the two options were to hide in the tunnels or to return the way they came. It was possible Lord Marndeali would convince the Lannisters to retreat, but Myrcilla doubted it. Lannister soldiers would rather die in the field than report a failure to Lord Tywine. So would her and Tom be better served here or in the castle? The castle would have many exits. Myrcilla looked at the stable boy, who was about the same size as Tommen. In a fight, the Marndealis had the advantage since this was their home, but even if they fell, 2 more servants coming or going from a house the size would not be of any note. And servants could easily find disguises. We go back. You will need to find us servants' clothes so that if we need to flee, we can move unnoticed. The maid looked relieved to have some direction and she nodded. Yes, princess. She crowded past Myrcilla in the narrow tunnel and ran up the stairs that they had only recently just stumbled down. Myrcilla. Tommen whispered, fear in his voice. Think of this as a story, the kind the maester used to tell when he was teaching you histories, Myrcilla suggested. People usually die in those stories, Tommen said in a tiny voice. We shall not, Myrcilla said fiercely. They were Baratheons. They withstood the storm, and even if a storm came, they would stand long after the winds failed and the rain stopped. She towed Tommen along until they reached the hallway with Lord Wiman's room. An older woman stood there now, keys hanging from a heavy belt. 7 save us, she said. What are you doing? You were to take the prince and princess out to the stable. The stable boy spoke up. The Lannisters seized it. 7 save us, the old woman whispered again. I thought it would be best for us to dress like servants. That way, should we need to leave, we can do so when it might be normal for a servant to leave the castle, Myrcilla said. The older woman seemed to think about that for a moment. Aye, that's a good plan. You should hide in the Lord's chambers until it's safe. When will it be safe? Tommen asked. I don't know, young prince, the old woman said, but I do know it's not safe for you to be moving about now. She hurried into Lord Wiman's chamber and gestured for them to follow. Is it proper to hide here? Myrcilla asked. Right now, it matters not a whit what is proper, the old woman said. Focus on keeping yourself and your brother alive and nothing more. Honor means little to a woman if she has no breath to speak of it. For some reason, hearing a northerner speak poorly of honor frightened her more than anything, but she followed the woman into Lord Mandaealis' chambers. The old woman went to the unmade bed with gold sheets and velvet covers and raised the mattress up. In no time, she had split the bottom of the mattress with a small knife and she started pulling out feathers and ticking. "Get over here, girl," the woman ordered the maid. "Lift your skirt, create a sling for this." She pulled armfuls of feathers and ticking out of the mattress, pushing it into the maid's dress, which she held like a makeshift basket. "Carry this to an unused room and drop it in a corner." When the old woman deemed that enough had been removed, she gestured Myrcella closer. "You and the prince will hide in here. Make no sound unless Lord Mandaealy comes alone. Do not trust any servant or guard you may see, no matter what colors they wear." "Surely the danger cannot be that much," Tommen said. "Surely soldiers would not change the coat of arms they carry." The old woman looked at Tommen with pity. "Your grandfather locked children in a mine and flooded it. Mewling babes in their mother's arms, crying toddlers, old women, he had no mercy for any of them. Do you think such a man would hesitate to order his soldiers to carry another man's shield if it got them what they wanted?" Myrcella put a hand on Tommen's shoulder. "It's good advice. We'll listen and follow it." Myrcella's heart broke for Tommen, who had tears slowly rolling over his cheeks. His greatest pleasure was saving kittens, and now they must speak of the atrocities that men committed. Worse, they spoke of atrocities their grandfather committed and the danger they were in from rough men who might go too far to find them. And these might be Uncle Stannis or Uncle Renly's men in false colors, and they might want to kill Tommen because of the rumors. They had certainly never shown any real interest in having nephews or a niece. Uncle Renly bought them a present on name days, but that was the extent of their interest in family. Perhaps they would even try to use her to control Robb, although Robb would never dishonor his father's orders, not for her. Not for anyone. Myrcella climbed into the slit in the mattress, guiding Tommen to lay right in front of her as the old woman lowered the mattress down and then rearranged the feathers that remained. With only a couple of inches of feathers between them and the edge of the mattress, Myrcella could see the room in blurry outlines. The gold sheets gave the world an odd glow that was almost peaceful if not for the dreadful circumstances. Tommen was crying softly now, and Myrcella held a hand in front of his face to make sure that he didn't inhale feathers. "We'll be okay," she promised him softly. Inside, she cursed fate. If a storm at sea had slowed these attackers only a week, it would have given the wagon time to return from Winterfell, but she could not live in those mitrbins. They were here and attacking the castle gates. There was little she could do to change either fact. They only had to survive. The old woman left, closing Lord Mandaealis' door behind her, and they lay there for a long time. The mattress ticking around them made her itch and the board beneath was hard, but Tommen still managed to fall asleep. Myrcella was not so blessed. She lay in the dark and listened to every sound, waiting for soldiers to come bursting in and tear them free of their hiding place, or for Lord Mandalay to come with his booming voice and laugh and tell them it was all a mistake. She waited for either extreme even as the windows let in the first morning light. When the door finally did open, she had fallen into a sort of stupor, a trance where nothing seemed real. Where she imagined she was still back in Winterfell, laying in her bed having a strange dream that she would tell Robb about in the morning. But when she saw who had come in, she knew it was no dream. Lord Mandaealy was blooded, one eye shut with swelling as he led a dozen Lannister soldiers into the room. Myrcella put her hand over Tommen's mouth to keep him quiet as he woke, and she felt him go stiff as he too saw who had come. "This is the last room," Lord Mandaealy spat out, his words more angry than she'd ever heard the jovial lord use. "And they are not here either. I told you, I sent them to Winterfell." The soldier in the fanciest armor backhanded Lord Mandaealy so hard that he stumbled to the side, but he stayed on his feet. "Then why do your servants report seeing them here yesterday?" Lord Mandaealy stood taller and wiped the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand before squaring off with the soldier. "Because they were here until unidentified sails were reported. If I fear my guests are in danger, I do not report to my household on their movements." "Then send a raven to recall them." "Shall I send a raven to Winterfell, good sir? Shall I tell my sovereign lord Zair that he should send his betrothed back to be taken hostage? I promise you, no matter what words I use, that is the message that will be received. Accept that your mission here has failed. Return to your master and tell him that." Myrcella was afraid to even breathe. Everyone knew how Tywin Lannister reacted to subordinates who failed. Lord Marndale was as much as telling this man to go kill himself. She held her breath, praying for his safety. "You assume the prince and princess are our only objective," the soldier said. "Just do as ordered and let us worry about our orders. White Harbor is in the north. Lord Stark is master here, not Lord Tywin, so I care not for your objectives. Lord Tywin is the hand of the king, and the king says who is master and who shall shut up and serve. Not even a king has that much power. This is Lord Stark's territory." "And where is Lord Stark?" From the smug tone and cruel smile, this soldier knew something of Lord Stark's fate. "I believe he is enjoying the hospitality of Lord Tywin," Lord Marndale said in a bitter voice, "but that does not change the fact that we will follow his orders till the end." Tommen's breath was coming in quick little gasps, and Myrcella rubbed tiny circles on his chest to try and calm him. Right now the men's yelling would hide any noise, but they were far from safe. "Lord Stark will take the king's orders just as you will. So you tell me how you are going to get the prince and princess back here," the soldier ordered. Lord Marndale stood taller. "I'm not," he said in a calm voice. The soldier pulled his sword, and now Myrcella had to fight the urge to gasp. She wanted to burst out of hiding, demand that they stop, that they spare Lord Marndale's life. Their freedom was not worth this price. Lord Marndale looked down at the sword before making eye contact with the soldier. "If you are willing to threaten a lord, that means you were given orders to threaten me, maybe even to kill me, before you ever left the Red Keep. After all, Lord Tywin doesn't issue threats that he is unwilling to follow through on. Do you think you will find my son more pliable than I? Do you think my son will break faith with Lord Stark? Perhaps you think my son can magic the prince or princess out of thin air." He waved his hand at the empty room as if to emphasize that there was no one hiding here. "My son will stand firm for Lord Stark just as I have, just as Lord Robb will carry out his father's orders. You Southerners, do you think so little of your sons that you expect them to give up their honor the moment their father's blood runs cold?" Hot tears ran over Myrcella's nose and dripped onto the board beneath her. Surely this man would not kill an unarmed lord. Surely her grandfather would not have ordered such a horror. A whisper of a memory floated into her awareness: older servants accusing Lord Tywin of ordering the rape and murder of Princess Elia and the murder of her young children. Myrcella had thought the servants were making up tales, but now she was unsure. Lord Marndale seemed so confident in his claim that Lord Tywin had ordered whatever these soldiers planned to do. "I assume your son is not as stupid as you," the soldier said before he thrust his sword through Lord Marndale's stomach. Myrcella gasped, unable to control her own reaction, and Tommen gave a little cry, but both sounds were swallowed by the cheers of the soldiers and the rasping gasps as Lord Marndale sunk to his knees. He clutched his stomach as the soldier pulled the sword out and blood and guts began to spill. "You Northerners believe yourselves untouchable," the soldier said. "You yielded easily enough to a few spies and a few bribes. The rest of the North will fall just as easily. If we have to fight our way to Winterfell to get the prince and princess back, then we shall." Lord Marndale was losing color from his face, and Myrcella tightened her arms around Tommen before thinking to finally cover his eyes so that he would not have to watch their kind host die. "Search the room," the guard ordered, and his underlings scattered to the corners. They threw open chests and the armoire. One crawled under the bed and another tore paintings and tapestries off walls in search of hidden alcoves. But none of them thought to look inside the mattress that now felt like a shroud. They were buried alive, trapped in a golden shroud as Lord Marndale died on the floor. Myrcella didn't know how long it took for the soldiers to finish their search, but the whole time she watched as Lord Marndale's breaths became more pained until finally he was coughing blood on the stone floor and then twitches in his limbs stilled. "Nothing," one of the soldiers said. "Damn them to the seven hells," another swore. "I am sick of these stubborn Northerners." "Hopefully his family will be more amenable," the senior soldier said, and then he gestured for them to all leave. Myrcella lay there, tears running down her face. Lord Marndale said Lord Tywin had ordered his death, and the guards had not disagreed. Myrcella was more determined than ever to get herself and Tommen free of her kin, Lannister and Baratheon alike. They couldn't be trusted. And Robb needed to hear of his bannerman's death. When she was Lady Stark, these would be her people, and her heart ached at the disrespect Lord Marndale had been shown. Light was spilling in through the windows before a man in torn and dirty clothes stumbled in. Prince. Princess. Myrcella tightened her hand around Tommen's mouth, but he drove an elbow back into her side, startling her into letting go. He cried out, "Sir Randall." Only then did Myrcella recognize the man who had guarded them for a year in Winterfell. He rushed to the bed and looked under, but Myrcella was already pushing the mattress up and off both her and Tommen. Feathers spilled out over them, and Sir Randall looked nearly ready to cry as he touched each of them on the arm as though checking to see if they were real. "Where are the others?" "Sir Bywater?" Myrcella asked, although she already knew the answer. Sir Randall might be dressed like a servant, but there was a thickening around his waist that suggested a bandage, and he was not moving well. "Sir Bywater sent me to get you, and the stewardess revealed your hiding place. The Lannisters have pulled back into the main hall and courtyard, so we need to go now. Right now." He tried to stand, but he stumbled to one knee, and Myrcella darted to his side to keep him from falling over. "Sir, you cannot ride. You won't survive. We should find a place to hide here until they leave." He shook his head. "They were sent to occupy White Harbor. They won't be leaving, and I am not long for this world either way, Princess. But my last duty to you and my last promise to Sir Bywater was that I would get you to the horses so you could ride for Moat Cailin." The stable boy put rocks in the shoes of several horses to make them look lame so they would be left at the lower stables. "This is our only chance. We have to go now." He forced himself to his feet and pressed his hand to his side over the thick bandage. "The Mandaealis?" Tommen asked, a quiver in his voice, although his eyes were dry, only the tear tracks on his dusty face revealing the truth. "Sir Garland has claimed Winifred and the Lannister men dare not challenge him. The Reach has too much power, so she is safe." In that, Myrcella heard a darker truth. The rest of the Mandaealis were not safe. She wondered if they had been imprisoned or killed or if they were suffering some tortures. She sent a prayer for Sir Garland's soul, asking the gods old and new to protect him and his betrothed. Maybe Garland could extend the protection to Wyler, assuming she had not fled. For the first time, Myrcella understood why people wanted power. She understood it in her gut, because there was nothing she wanted more than power over these men who had condemned such a good family. And she would see them punished. "Come," she said to Tommen before she got to hand under their savior's shoulder to help him toward the family tunnels. "Princess, no, if you know where to go, you should run. I will not leave you to die at the hand of these Lannisters," Myrcella said, ignoring the body of the Lord of White Harbor who would never laugh again. "You will go with us to the stables, and if you cannot ride and if your wound is enough to be fatal, then at least you shall die among allies." It was a poor comfort, but in this day of horrors, Myrcella had nothing else to offer him. "Come," she said, pulling on his arm. The man stared at her as though judging whether she would fight him on this, but after a second, he nodded his agreement. Tommen exclaimed, "Wait," before he arranged the mattress as best he could to make it look normal. "We don't want the Lannisters to discover that we were still here when he said we had gone." Tommen's gaze avoided Lord Mandaealis' body. Good thinking," Myrcella said. She was going to get her brother to safety, and then she was going to figure out how to help Lord Robb take back White Harbor so she could see all these brigands hang. None of them deserved to still draw breath, not after the sins they had committed in this place. Chapter 25. Notes. I got distracted with my professionally published novels and a time travel Harry Potter, but then I got several lovely comments all hit my inbox at once, several theorizing that the attack on White Harbor was Cersei's work. Don't we all love to hate that woman, and one calling me arrogant and terrible for writing this when I didn't like GRM. I'm not going to lie, Dead Dogs, or Direwolves, is one step too far for me. I actually had less trouble watching the flea bottom scene with Demon going anti-crime. But anyway, I can fall in love with worlds and characters based on fanfic, and this fandom has amazing fanfic writers. And that love, plus that hate, made me want to come back to this universe. Chapter text. Benjen looked up when Jaime walked into his solar, closing the door behind him. He had given up the ruse of using his upper solar, choosing to take meetings in this more secure, windowless room. "You sent for me." Jaime dropped into a seat and propped his foot up on the edge of Benjen's desk. The more the man worried, the more he put up a facade of carelessness that was starting to annoy Benjen. "Badly. Report from King's Landing. The Lannister fleet moved. Jaime stilled. So it's open war. Are they heading to the Crown lands to meet up with my father? The Crown fleet and a large number of Lannister ships were seen moving south. A third of the Lannister ships remained. Moving most of the fleet south made sense. Stannis was gathering the Stormlands, and so was Renly. Benjen had no idea how that would end since the brothers had no love lost between them. He couldn't imagine leading men against Ned, but Ned had predicted the two Baratheons would go to war over the throne if something happened to Robert's children. 2 weeks later, all but 2 of the remaining ships sailed out of harbor and were last seen passing Claw Isle. They are sailing north. Jaime's voice was full of horror. The North was trying hard to stay out of the political machinations of the South, but first Ned was called to King's Landing and now southern ships were heading for their eastern shore. I only recently received this report, but the fleet was spotted 3 weeks ago. Jaime sat up. Do we have any reports of them landing in the north? None, Benjen said. But the Raven from White Harbor lacked the code words. And the Red Wine fleet? Jaime asked. All of the Reach holds in place. There are rumors that Olenna is joining us in calling for a great council. Benjen didn't understand that either. She would have thought they would sell their support in return for a betrothal. The Lannisters were outnumbered, so Joffrey's position as queen should have bought them an army. Yet the Reach sat neutral. Jaime frowned. This makes no sense. My father would not send so much of the fleet north when the Reach stood undecided. If Olenna sides with either Baratheon brother, he'll be crushed between the Stormlands and Reach armies. Yet Lannister ships sailed north. Something is wrong. Do we march for White Harbor? Benjen wished he had an answer. He had always been the second brother supporting Ned. Ned led the North to war against King Aerys. Ned sent Lyanna's child north and hid him with Benjen. Ned set the priorities when rebuilding the North. In all these endeavors, Benjen followed. He hadn't realized how much he relied on his brother until Ned disappeared into the pile of night waste that was King's Landing. White Harbor may be warning us of a trap. Tywin is a clever commander, and I fear to move too quickly when his orders appear illogical. There is some scheme we have not yet seen. Jaime ran a hand over his face. We need to get word to Moat Cailin. If something is wrong, Lord Wyman would have sent word there. Which is why I need you to lead a small group of our strongest fighters through the neck. Find out what has happened in White Harbor and bring word either to me or to Winterfell. Jaime shook his head. If I take our best fighters, I'll be leaving you vulnerable. I promised Jon that I would protect you and Castle Lyanna. You can best do that by finding out what has happened and seeing if any lord has word on the location of the Lannister fleet. It may have traveled to the Vale, but I am discomfited by our lack of information. Take 30 swords and clear the neck or any northern roads you find infested with Lannister soldiers. Castle Lyanna is more vulnerable than the rest of the north. We are not. Ned and I designed the castle to hold for years. We have independent wells in case attackers poison the Green Fork. We have stockpiles of food. We have glass houses to grow greens. A dozen men can man the gates and the sides of the castle are defended by the swamp. Horses and wagons cannot approach. This is the most secure castle south of the neck. It's not, Jaime said. Casterly Rock is far more secure, but in times of war, it is manned by at least 500 of my father's best men. The most secure location can fall. The Red Keep was thought impenetrable, but my father's men took it. Arrogance will get you killed. That's why I cannot understand why my father would have ordered the entire Lannister fleet away from King's Landing. If the Valerius or Red Wines move against Joffrey, the city will be vulnerable. Benjen took a deep breath. He disliked having to order others to act against their own good judgment. It reminded him of Brandon, who had always delighted in ordering Benjen and Lyanna around. As a child, he had always dreamed of being a traveling knight or a ranger on the wall or anything that allowed him to escape the pressures of leadership. However, this was the lot the gods had given him, and he would not allow Jaime's obstreperousness to interfere in plans he and Ned had made years ago. I will have enough men to defend Castle Lyanna. However, we must have word from White Harbor. We must tell Moat Cailin to close, and a raven is vulnerable to an archer's arrow. You can best help keep the north safe for Jon by traveling. Take a score of men, the best trained in the castle, and follow my orders." Jaime made a face. "If you are pledged to my family, I will not have your disobedience," Benjen said sharply. Eyes narrowed, Jaime sat up. "I have no intention of refusing your orders. I gave my opinion, and if you disagree, I would rather lead the men than have you order another on this mission. Lannister soldiers will hesitate to attack me, and that will give us an advantage if there is an ambush. Just keep in mind that any ambush may be for you. Your father has never stopped seeking to retrieve you." Jaime wrinkled his nose. "I am aware. But my reluctance has more to do with the fact that Lady Brienne is sure to request the right to ride with us. I thought she was one of our best, and she swore to me that as long as the North called for a great council that her sword was sworn to us. Do you doubt her?" "Her honor, no," Jaime said. "She is Duncan the Tall-born again. However, she is a woman. I cannot ride into war with a woman. You know what happens when men take to the battlefield and their blood runs too hot." Benjen sucked in a breath when he realized when Jaime feared. He knew men lost all reason in war and too many lost their honor as well. Ned had castrated more than one Northman in Robert's rebellion, and he had told Benjen how he had to look away when women traded their bodies for food just to avoid starving. He even kept a list of those he suspected of using force against women. Ned would never condemn a man without evidence, but he certainly watched certain Northmen. He had servants embedded in the households of Bolton, Umber, Karstark, Ryswell, and Tallheart. If you have men you believe capable of that, tell me their names, and I will ensure they never have the opportunity. I don't fear our men. I fear every other man in the Seven Kingdoms, Jaime said. I would not see her used like that. However, I know she will demand to ride out with us, and as she is one of the best on the training grounds, I have no reason to deny her other than her fairer sex, although fair might not be the most appropriate word. She is hardly hideous, Benjen said. He held no interest in women, but the woman had a symmetrical face and straight nose. She gave no care to her hair, and it was as rough as any man's, but anyone who cared for the sword more than the gentler arts would be the same. Well, anyone except Jaime, who seemed to love his hair as much as his sword, and that was a considerable amount of love. No, she is not, Jaime admitted, which makes me worry more. Many men will want to humiliate her for having talent with the sword. But if I leave her behind, I dishonor her as a swordsman. He ran his fingers through his hair. Jaime rarely showed so much worry for another person, unless it was Tyrion or Jon. Benjen was startled to see how much he feared for the lady's honor. Leaning back in his chair, he studied Jaime for a time. Perhaps with war looming, you should return to Casterly Rock and take up the mantle of heir. Jaime's countenance changed immediately. He lurched forward before settling on the edge of the chair, fury twisting his features. I am a Kingsguard. I will guard my king and his family for the rest of my life. Benjen raised an eyebrow. Indeed. You have a right to choose who you will be. Will you deny the lady the right to do the same? She has her ancestors' talent with the sword, so do not attempt to force her into the mold of other ladies. Slowly, Jaime sagged back into the chair. You are unsubtle in your arguments, Lord Benjen. I have never tried to be anything else. Jaime stood. I will gather a score of men and one woman, and we will ride for Moat Cailin in 2 days. Excellent. Take several ravens with you, Benjen said. Jaime gave him a sarcastic bow before he left the office. Benjen let out a long breath. This was the first step toward war. Moat Cailin would close. That would signal White Harbor to close to any ship in open conflict, so all Crown Land, Stormland, and Westerland ships. The Reach and Vale were taking longer, but they would join the conflict soon. Jon Arryn believed in honor, so he would support the Lannisters if he rejected the claim of bastardy. If he believed Stannis Ravens, then he would march the Vale under Stannis banners. Unless his honor precluded following a man who prayed at the altar of a foreign god, especially one that advocated for burning people alive. In that case, Jon Arryn might support Renly. Benjen had no idea what he would do if he knew about Jon Targaryen. Ned would tell his foster father to support a Baratheon because he feared the throne. His love for Jon drove him to want his nephew as far from it as possible, but Benjen could not predict how other kingdoms would react to a legitimized Targaryen. His solar door was open and the only light came from the torches, so when someone stepped in front of one, Benjen was startled out of his musing. Lady Lormia. He stood to greet the lady. She smiled. Lord Benjen. How can I help you, my lady? No one came to this solar unless they were in dire need. It was dark and damp and the chairs were hard. This was the solar Benjen used when he didn't want to be disturbed, so he made it as unwelcoming as possible. She closed the door behind her, leaving her lady companion standing in the corridor. Have you met my brother Dennis, my lord? I regret I have not. I have heard he is an honorable man. Benjen said. He came around the desk and moved a chair for her. In truth, Benjen felt pity for any man of honor unlucky enough to be bound to the south. With Joffrey a bastard and Tywin likely to set the kingdom alight in order to defend his claim, the south was no place for an honorable man. Lady Lormia sat. He is quick to anger, quick to forgive, quick to laugh, and quick to see the truth of matters, she said. He is also an unrepentant slob, but I imagine that is of less interest to anyone who is not forced to share space with him. The servants, however, were often wroth with him. You speak of him fondly. Instead of answering, she reached through the fidget and pulled out a bit of parchment, placing it on the desk before she sat. Benjen returned to his own seat, eager to keep propriety and a certain space between them. He read the parchment. Your brother appears interested in your success here. Benjen pointedly ignored Dennis Plum's oblique reference to banners being called. He never used the word war, but he discussed barracks being full of men from the countryside and blacksmith's forge ringing day and night. He spent more time on such matters than he did asking about Lorimer's ladies or describing the health of their relatives. My brother is warning me that war is coming. I believe I see the same in your preparations here. Benjen understood. My lady, the north intends to remain closed until there is a great council, but I would never keep you from your family. If you wish to return, I will assign a guard to escort you and your ladies. You misunderstand, Lady Lormia said. If Dennis wished me to return, he would have described some illness in the family and suggested I should return to see them before they meet the stranger. He would have said he missed me. He could have given me 100 excuses to return home without making you suspicious if you were ignorant regarding the political tension in the south. Instead, he encourages me in my endeavors here and praises my industriousness. He wants me to remain. However, he speaks of war to warn me that I could end up fodder for this war if I do not secure myself a future. What future do you seek? Benjen knew they had brought Lormia here in part to see if she would be a proper match for Jon, but with war on the horizon, Jon's marriage had to be a political decision, and her family did not have the status. The close relations with Targaryens, which would have been a boon if Jon remained in hiding and which would have explained any children with Targaryen coloring, would not be a hindrance to finding Jon allies. Dorne and the Reach would be particularly interested in marrying their daughters to a future king. A marriage with Jon. Benjen did not hide his doubt. Her smile was gentle. I do not think that would be a good match. However, my lord, it seems as if you are in need of a wife. Benjen jerked back as if burned. I am not, he snapped before it occurred to him that he was offering the lady a grave insult. Despite that, her smile remained. In the south, we are not as bothered by men who have other interests. Many women whisper that they would prefer to have a husband who prefers swords over cups. Swords over cups. Benjen was bewildered. Her cheeks pinked. My lord. Your lack of interest in women goes beyond protecting your son's birthright. I can see that you do not wish a woman to share your bed, and that is a trait I would embrace in a husband. As long as any men you choose are discreet, there is no reason why we cannot marry. And a marriage would protect your reputation. If I do not fall pregnant, the fault would be with me. Benjen opened his mouth, but he could find no words. I understand men in the north attach such things to honor, but many in the south think that a man need only sire an heir, and you have done your duty. It has naught to do with duty. My lady, this is not a proper conversation. In truth, this was so far from proper that Benjen could hardly believe it was happening. It is not proper, but Dennis' letter is clear. The Plums prepare for war. We are the blood of the first men, and my brothers will not turn their backs on their liege lord. But if they are ordered to call for me, if I am still a Plum when declarations of war fly, my hand can be traded for swords. Lannisters can give me to an old man who will not allow me ladies or permit me to earn my own coin. In fact, I think that is the most likely outcome, and I will tell you now that I know plants and dyes because of my work with cloth, but that same knowledge comes with information about which plants will kill if you add them to your works. I will die before I allow myself to be traded like a cow, so a little impropriety with a lord I respect is small in comparison. Benjen felt light-headed. You would not. I would. Lormia had always impressed Benjen as having great strength, but to die at her own hand was to admit defeat in a way he could not imagine. He would fight to his last breath no matter the odds. Would you consider a marriage or must I look elsewhere? She asked. Where could she look? Castle Lyanna was isolated, and other than the two Lannister men, there were no others of appropriate status. Would she marry a hedge knight simply to avoid returning to her family? Marriage to me would bring you no honor, my lady. She laughed. I have a Targaryen's looks when the dynasty has fallen. I have first men blood when my loyalties are to the south. I earn my own coin rather than relying on a betrothal, and up until now, my father has refused me any marriage that does not come with a holding. I have long ago stopped hoping for honor and now I seek only peace and a bedroom next to a husband who will allow me to live in peace. That is all the honor I would ask from you. As long as you are quiet about any other interests you have, I do not care and I will assist you in hiding them from others. Benjen's face heated with shame. There is no need for assistance. My lady, I had thought the wall my future until Jon appeared as a baby. He swallowed, caught between the truth and a lie that would offend a lady who had come to him in honest need. I have no interest, he whispered, in cups or swords. I have no lovers. I hide no men. I am, in truth, broken. Instead of disgust, she looked on him with relief. I know many women who are the same. I suspect I might be the same, but as I have never laid with a man, I would not know for certain. I do know that some ladies will seek out men, even inappropriately, and I have never felt the urge. My mother spoke to me about how to ease things if I had no interest because she suspected I would need them. Benjen's mouth fell open, but he had no words. He had lived nearly 40 years with the certainty that he was unique and broken and his only value was in serving others because he could not carry on the Stark name. When Ned had been at war, he had lived in terror because if Ned died, he would need to carry on the Stark name, and he knew he could not. Now Lady Lormia spoke of this as a common occurrence. This would make marriage even more pleasant, she said. We can have adjoining lord and lady quarters, share responsibilities, care for one another, and we have no need for the, she wrinkled her nose, messy parts of a marriage. But you could have no children. And I would not face death in childbed. It is not a burden. And if I carried the Stark name, no Lannister could touch me. Benjen rubbed a hand over his face. This should rightfully go through my brother as the Warden of the North and the head of my family. She sighed. I would like nothing more. But Lord Stark is held by the liege lord of my family and I would cut that tie as soon as possible. In return, I vow on my first men blood and my honor that I will support you in all things and I will extend every effort to open the ears of my brothers so they may consider truths they otherwise would reject outright. It will be a poor wedding. We can have no one inside our security who might pose a risk. My brothers will understand. If Harwin and Peter are of a mind with Dennis, they would prefer a quick wedding, but it must be in a September. I fear someone would challenge the wedding if it were only under a heart tree. The twins is closest, but there is prodigious danger that direction. Seaguard is several days' ride in open territory. I can ask if the Crannog men have a September, but I doubt that they do. Perhaps we don't need a September, Lormia said slowly. Perhaps we only need a Septon, and if Walder Free has one, surely we can find a way to lure the man out for long enough to wed us. Are you suggesting that we abduct a man from the faith? Benjen asked, a smile pulling at the edges of his lips. Indeed, I am. It is a foolish man who gets between a potential bride and her wedding, so if a Septon is all that we lack, I can think of one or two inducements. She smiled at him, and Benjen realized that his respect for the woman precluded him from sending her back to Lannister territory. She would die before she yielded to a bad marriage, and that meant that Benjen could only save her by offering her a cold one. Then we shall abduct a Septon, Benjen said firmly. Chapter 26. Notes. I know how hard Christmas is for some people, so I am going to try to put up multiple chapters today. I hope everyone finds peace and / or joy today. Chapter text. How is she? John asked as soon as the healer left Dani's room. She held a bundle, but it wasn't moving. She will be fine. The child has passed. John reached out a hand, but the healer pulled the bundle closer. It is best you do not see. Oswell cleared his throat. Is the child wider than normal with short arms and legs? Are there signs of scales? The healer looked at Oswell in obvious shock. It is a common malady for those with dragon blood, Oswell said. Queen Rolla had 3 such children. Roriger said he was glad he had no sister to marry because he thought the dragon blood had grown too thick. She must have thick dragon blood to have those animals. The healer glanced back toward the room where Dani rested. The 3 hatchlings had refused to leave her, clinging to her arms even as the healer came in to see to the birth. Is she awake? John asked. He had thought a healthy child would be the one boon she would get from her nightmarish first marriage. She is awake and strong. I have told her she can have more children, but she mourns this one. I shall take it to the White Temple and return with the bones. The healer walked between Oswell and John, leaving them in the corridor. They had no female members of the family to sit with her in her loss. Laena was gone, and she had died not only horrifically, but she had betrayed Daenerys. Your Grace? Oswell asked. I should talk to her. She didn't have anyone else, and she was John's family. He knew nothing about women or children or loss, not the sort she had suffered, but she had no one else. He took a deep breath and knocked softly. Princess, he called. Please come in, Your Grace, she called. John pushed the door open and stepped into the room. Are you well? As well as I can be, Dani said, her hand resting on her belly. It was still swollen, but not nearly as much. The green and bronze dragon with orange wings tried to shriek, but it was far more of a squeak. John had to refrain from smiling at the ridiculousness of the tiny dragon challenging him. One day, it would be a mighty beast, but right now it was little more than a lizard. I am sorry, John said. Would you like me to sit with you? I would not want to bother, Dani said. Without her hair, she seemed smaller and more fragile. The strong woman John had seen on the great grass sea had vanished, and the woman who was left was hollowed out by grief. A chair sat near the foot of her bed, and John moved to it. Oswell stood just inside the door, watching silently. John missed Arthur, who always knew what to say. Oswell treated John like he should have answers, but John didn't. All he had was fear and indecision. If he moved too fast, his Stark family was at risk, but he was not willing to let Joffrey keep the throne after Robert died. He knew from hearing his father complain that Robert was a useless king, even if Uncle Ned defended his friend, but the kingdom could survive a useless king. It could even thrive if that king had the right advisors. But John knew enough about Joffrey to know he would be another mad king. John had a responsibility to the people, a responsibility to clean up the mess his Targaryen father had made. The healer said you can have more children. Sir Oswell said your mother had 3 stillborn children born with such. John did not want to say the word. Deformities, Daenerys said softly. She looked up, meeting John's eyes. I am the widow of a horse lord. I birthed a deformed babe. Who will wed me after this? You are a beautiful woman, a Targaryen, the mother of 3 dragons. You will be the sister of the king of Westeros. You will have your choice of men. She studied him. So you will fight for the throne. Sir Gerald used to tell Viserys and me that we must understand that our line had lost the throne. Robert claimed the throne on the strength of having a Targaryen grandmother. He used his lineage to put his own claim above my Uncle Ned's or even any claim made by the Arryns or the Lannisters who took the Red Keep. That means he never removed Targaryens by conquest, John said. I plan to force the Baratheons into a great council as soon as King Robert dies. If he took the throne because he was the male next in the Targaryen line, then I have a better claim, and the kingdom will see that Joffrey is a monster. Her gaze dropped to her bed where the green and bronze dragon was waving his wings madly even though he was too small to fly. You were born a bastard. The lords of Westeros would have accepted a legitimized Targaryen daughter. They probably would have vied for the right to marry such a daughter. However, a legitimized son will not be offered the same respect. True, John agreed, but I have heard of Joffrey all my life. He visited my father's castle once. Your father, she frowned. Benjen Stark, John said. Rhaegar is my sire, but he did not raise me. My father will always be Benjen Stark. He told me how Joffrey poked our horses with sharp sticks to drive them mad. He killed his brother's pets and he tormented anyone who came close. King Robert wanted to marry Joffrey to my cousin, Sansa, but my uncle Ned would not have it even though they were the closest of friends. I plan to quietly travel and see if I can find support. My father will advocate for me in the north, and my uncle would support me over Joffrey if King Robert died. Arthur believed Dawn would support me. John swallowed the pain that came with Arthur's name. Robert will likely outlive Tywin Lannister, and Jaime and Tyrion will support me. The Reach has always supported Targaryens. Arthur and I talked a lot, and there is a clear pathway to the throne, and he told me that if I fail to take the throne, the Seven Kingdoms are likely to fall apart and then the small folk will be prey to the wars that will follow. So you feel obligated to take the throne? John considered his answer while the green and bronze dragon charged down her leg, hissing at John before he stopped and tilted his head to the side. I do. My uncle wants Starks to stay in the north. He says wolves do not do well in the south. But I'm a Targaryen. You're a Targaryen. Our ancestor united the Seven Kingdoms so we could fight the evil of the Bloodstone Emperor and the dead his magic reanimates. The, what? Daenerys sat up. Didn't Oswell or Gerald tell you? John looked to Oswell. He scoffed. If you're talking about prophecy with the Long Night or the Blood Betrayal or Lightbringer, that was all Arthur. He and Rhaegar researched myths endlessly. I know your mother Lyanna came to believe that the Long Night was coming soon, but I don't know what stories Rhaegar shared to convince her that they needed to have a third child, a third rider for dragons that didn't exist. Oswell looked at the dragons clambering over Daenerys. Or they hadn't existed at the time. Do you believe in prophecy? Dany asked, something sharp in her words. John didn't answer immediately. I have to. My mother chose to have me because she believed Rhaegar was the prince that was promised. She believed that she would give birth to the third sword, the one that would stand against the Long Night. In the north, we tell those stories. My uncle Ned, he always told us that stories are warnings and that just as mammoths and giants are real and that he has met both, that White Walkers and the Night King are equally real. Uncle Ned wants me to stay in the north to fight them, but my father believes I could protect the north by uniting the Seven Kingdoms from the throne. Dany picked at loose threads in her blanket. The Dothraki believed I would be the mother of the stallion that mounted the world. Drogo thought it would be his son. She stroked the black dragon. I don't believe the stallion will be a son at all. You think it will be a dragon? It made sense. She nodded. A dragon could mount the world. Dragons live so long the prophecy may not come true for centuries, but they thought they could interpret the words of a seer. Sir Arthur said prophecies were failing, that it sometimes happened when major shifts in magic happened, like during the Doom John told her. I fear prophecy, she confessed in a small voice. John understood. While he and Arthur had followed Daenerys across the grass sea, he had told so many stories about prophecy, about Aegon's original conquest and his dream, about Rhaegar's dream and Lyanna's arguments. The thought that all these people, from Aegon to his own mother, had all lived and died to create him was terrifying. Sir Arthur would say we should not live our lives by prophecy. We must act in a way that is logical, but knowing a prophecy can warn us of danger. Can it? She demanded. Rhaegar believed in prophecy and he condemned our family to death and exile. Her words were sharp, and all three dragons reacted, even Viserion screamed a warning. I'm sorry, John said softly. It was his sire and his birth that had destroyed the family. She sighed and brushed a tear from her cheek. You have nothing to regret. For all we know, Rhaegar was right. And most of the damage was done by my father. His madness turned the Seven Kingdoms against us. She was silent, but John could feel the heaviness in the moment. She had more she wished to say, and John waited for her to find the right words. In the fire, I saw something, she whispered. John waited. The room smelled of blood, and Dany was so tired that her hand was trembling, but she didn't yield to her fatigue. I saw 14 flames vanishing until only one remained, and it gave birth to a deformed dragon that turned into a wolf. She gave him a knowing look. John could see how his birth might be described as deformed. His mother had gotten pregnant believing she would die but choosing to give her life for the cause of defending the realm of man, and he was born a bastard. In Westeros, both those would be deformities. Women didn't put their lives at risk for a cause, and bastards were hated in 5 of the 7 kingdoms. Dany took a deep breath before continuing. I saw deformed dragons wheeling in tight circles before a horn sounded, and all the wolves and dragons stilled. Then a red spire rose and a great black dragon appeared with amber eyes. She looked at her black dragon, who did have orange eyes that might be amber in the right light. But as the dragon grew, his eyes turned green, and then he grew so large that he crashed to the ground and vanished into the fire. Perhaps it's the same as the prophecy of the stallion that mounts the world. Maybe you're seeing how great your dragon will become. John suggested. That didn't explain the 14 flames, but this was not the time to debate prophecy. She was exhausted. Maybe, she said softly. She smiled at her dragons. Maybe we will never know. Rhaegar believed he needed 3 children, but perhaps the family only needed 3 dragons. I'm sorry he didn't live to see them. He did see the eggs, Oswell said. Rhaegar had them in his room for almost 5 years before he sent them away, but they never hatched. However, he believed with his whole heart they would for his children. Blood and fire, John said. 3 deaths, 3 dragons. He hated that Dany had lost her brother and her child, but it made sense that magic would claim a life for a life. Dany stroked the head of the lightest dragon, a silvery white creature that curled against her cheek and made small chirping sounds. What will you name them? John asked, eager to find a topic that would not tax her after such a difficult ordeal. Should we not name them together? We are both Targaryens, Dany said, her gaze coming up to meet John's. He smiled at her. They came from the fire with you. You're their mother. She looked down at them. The black dragon, the largest, was curled on her chest, watching the others in a way that made John think him rather judgmental. She said as she stroked the white one. This one is Viserion. He is so loving. You didn't know Viserys when we were young. He was a warm soul, even if he sometimes lost himself. I hate what Laena, her words ended with a sob. John rested his hand on her ankle. Oswell spoke, Princess, I am ashamed that we did not see what Laena was doing. We knew she grieved your mother's death and that she was angry with King Aerys, blaming him and Rhaegar for causing so much pain, but none of us realized that she allowed that anger to spill onto Viserys. He wasn't well, Dany said softly as she stroked the white dragon. It did appear to be the friendliest of the 3. She looked at the green and bronze dragon that had sunk teeth into John's sleeve and was trying to pull him, as if a lizard could move an elephant. Would you take offense if I named him Rhaegal? After my sire? John asked as he looked down at the audacious beast. They are both quick to act. Dany didn't say it, but John could also see how both foolishly rushed into a battle they were not prepared to fight. I will not if it offends you. He was my brother, but he was your sire. It is a good name, John said as he ran a finger over Rhaegal's back. The dragon paused to look at him before returning to its one-sided battle with John's sleeve. And the black one? He looked at the one that had claimed Dany's chest. She touched the black one's wing. Viserys always talked about our niece, your sister, Rhaenys. He said she was a bright child, always running around with her cat, excited to tell anyone what she had learned that day. He thought he would marry her because there were no other Targaryen brides for him, and he said he always looked forward to it. Her faithful companion was a black cat she named Balerion after the Black Dread. Would you think me too forward to name the 3rd dragon Balerion? John hated that his sister had died so horrifically. Jaime had tried to save John's siblings and Elia Martell, but Tywin Lannister had issued orders, and Jaime had been the only Kingsguard left in the Red Keep. I think that would be an excellent way to honor both Rhaenys and Aegon's mighty dragon. John held a finger out toward the black dragon, which sniffed at him before sneezing. May you grow as large as your namesake and may you always protect your mother, he said. Dany smiled at him, but then her smile faded and she looked toward the wall. John didn't know what to say to her. They sat in silence for a time. I think I would like to sleep now, she said softly. I will leave you, then Jon said. He wrapped his fingers around Rhaegal, carefully pulling him away from Jon's frayed sleeve before he left, Sir Oswyl following. Of the 3 Kingsguard who had been there for his birth, Sir Oswyl was the only one still alive. They reached the main floor before Sir Oswyl asked, "What will we do, Your Grace?" Jon gritted his teeth. He wanted to curse fate and drag Arthur out of the grave to make these decisions. Arthur planned to visit Dorne next. He thought the Martells would support us if we presented Ella's letters. However, we need information. We should visit House Dane to return the sword. We can seek information on the state of the kingdom and judge our welcome in Dorne by seeing how they react to our story. Jon would have to send word to his father, so he knew that Jon planned to reveal himself to the Danes. That would allow the North to brace for any retaliation. Jon prayed to the old gods and the 14 flames that his kin in the North would be safe. Should I seek passage? Jon shook his head. No. Daenerys is too weak and the dragons vulnerable. Let us rest and train together. The Westerosi and Dothraki need to learn to fight shoulder to shoulder. Focus on training and we will move when Dany is ready. Jon suspected that might take months. I will see to it, Your Grace, Sir Oswyl said, seemingly content to follow orders. Jon wished he had as much confidence in his decision as Sir Oswyl. Chapter 27. Notes. Second chapter today. I'm working on a third. Chapter text. Jon would have liked to stay longer in Tollus, but word from Westeros suggested the kingdom had fallen into chaos. King Robert was dead and his 2 sons were publicly named bastards by their Baratheon uncle. Lannisters and Baratheons were moving toward open war, and Azoi merchants spoke of selling weapons to both sides and sell swords were moving west. And the North was not as uninvolved as Jon expected. He still dreamed of the Neck and running through the swamp. Ghost had found Lannisters in the swamp once, and Jon had tasted blood as Ghost had killed the pair. Jon feared that meant that the North had already been drawn into the fight. He had once seen Jaime leading a group that included a large woman with freckles and a broadsword. He needed to go home. Rhaegal, Viserion and Balerion were the size of dogs and able to fly, fight, and hunt on their own, so it was time for them to sail home. He stood on the Tollus dock and watched a ship loaded with their household. The Dothraki paced, unhappy at boarding a ship to cross the ocean, but they took their vows to Daenerys as seriously as Sir Oswyl took his responsibility to Jon. Oswyl stood next to Jon, his hand on his sword as he watched merchants and sailors and slaves crowd past. Jon gritted his teeth as a girl of 6 or 7 followed an adult man, a slave collar gleaming dully around her neck. His uncle Ned was right to give the king's justice to slavers who preyed on Westeros. The institution should be abolished everywhere, but he lacked the power to do so. Dany came closer, Balerion perched proudly on her shoulder while Viserion wheeled through the air above, screaming as he tried to avoid Rhaegal who pursued him. How soon will we leave? Within the hour, Princess Oswyl said without taking his gaze from the crowds. Your Dothraki are the last to board. I don't know about that. I think I am the last to arrive and I'll likely be the last to board at all. Rotund man with hair only on his face walked toward them. It took Jon a moment to recognize Thoros of Myr. Hello again, Daemon Targaryen. That is not my name, Jon said. Arthur said his mother had planned to name him that, but his uncle Ned had called him Gaejon since it sounded like Gage when said quickly. However, Jon was of the north and he would keep his northern name. Jon. Thoros smiled, and Oswyl shifted so he was standing in front of Jon, hand on sword. Yes, I hear you are called Jon Targaryen. He swept his red cloak aside, but instead of drawing his sword, he pulled a drinking skin and uncapped it. My God sent me. At least, I assume that's what the vision meant. I haven't been given visions for quite a while, and they are hard to understand under the best of circumstances. All we can do is follow where Arla leads or visit wherever we find the best wine. He lifted his drinking skin. What do you want, priest? Oswyl demanded. To follow the king my God sent me to follow. I thought you followed King Robert, Jon said. Thoros laughed. I drank with King Robert. He didn't care if I was a priest, and honestly, I didn't either. However, Arla seems to have remembered that I exist. It's a little surprising given how little effort I've put into remembering him. He hooked his drinking skin at his belt again. But such is the lot of a priest. And I have no need of a priest, Jon said. I don't believe that, Thoros answered. My God would not have bothered to send to me if you weren't in need of some divine assistance. He gestured toward the sky. I follow the old gods, not your god of burning people alive. Jon put his hand on his sword in warning. Thoros had been honorable and kind during the tourney where they had met, but now that he knew Jon was a Targaryen, his every motive was suspect. The priests of Orla would not earn a devotee with him, and he would not give them access to the Iron Throne. Even ruling Targaryens had needed to bend to the Seven, so a foreign god would only worsen his position. Thoros laughed. The Lord of Light never asks for someone to be burned alive. However, many priests find that sacrificing blood does sharpen the visions and imbue their magic with more power. Personally, I'm not that fond of having visions in the first place, so I have no need to sharpen them. Actually, I haven't had visions since I was a boy and the priests who bought me tried to beat faith into my hide. And back then, the visions were not clear enough to follow. I suppose you could say you are the first true vision I've had. I still follow the old gods. Thoros shrugged. Who's to say Orla isn't one of your old gods? Who's to say that your old gods are not the same as the 14 Flames of Valyria, which are the gods I had assumed you were going to follow? I was going to make an argument that Orla being a god of light and fire was probably one of the 14. Daenerys walked over to them, Balerion and perched on her shoulder and letting out little puffs of smoke. Princess Thoros greeted her. I am Thoros of Myr, a priest of Orla sent to help guide your nephew onto the throne. He paused. Maybe. What you mean maybe? Daenerys asked. Her gaze had grown far more suspicious in these months since Viserys had died and Laena had shown her betrayal. Thoros grinned, but his smile carried very little mirth. In the fire, I saw the form of dragons turn into wolves turn into deformed dragons. Then I saw Jon calling a dragon out of a mist before I saw a vision of this fine town. His gaze locked on a drunken sailor chained to a pillory. Given that my vision came shortly after fools started fighting for the Iron Throne, I assumed that meant my god wanted the young dragon wolf to take the throne. Funny, Dany said, I don't remember you saying there was a throne in your vision. Because there was a lack of one, Thoros admitted. But visions from Orla are seldom clear. That might be why so many priests choose to sacrifice royal blood to gain more insight. It really is quite frustrating when one receives such unclear directives. But I do believe our God leaves something to human choice. It's one of the few things I like about my God. If you don't like him, then why do you serve him? Daenerys asked. She seemed willing to listen to him, but Balerion continued to puff out smoke. He was so large that he kept flapping his wings to stay upright on her shoulder when he was too large to roost easily. Having raised a direwolf and knowing the damage that Ghost could do, Jon could only imagine what these dragons were capable of. He and Dany had been working to teach all three that humans were not prey, but from the looks Balerion was giving Thoros of Myr, that lesson had not taken well. Thoros hooked his thumb in Jon's direction. This one worships the old gods even though he's a Targaryen whose ancestors have worshipped the 14 Flames for a few thousand years. Why? I imagine it's because those are the gods he was raised with. I am as much as Stark as I am Targaryen, Jon objected. He had long ago accepted that Benjen was not his biological father, but the Starks were still his blood. And unlike some men of Westeros, he refused to believe that his mother's blood was less potent than his father's. You're Targaryen. I saw the fire in you when we fought at the tourney. At the time, I thought you were some grandchild or great-grandchild of a bastard. Even the great houses have them, especially when you have kings like Aerys who would claim rights over even noble women. You would not be the first member of a noble house to have the blood of one man and the name of another. Daenerys blanched, as she often did when reminded that her own father had been a monster. Oswell said, Your Grace, he was close to King Robert. We have no way of knowing where his loyalties lie, so we should send him away. Daenerys' gaze grew sharp and she stared at Jon. He understood exactly what she was thinking. When she had been in the magical fire that had taken her brother's life, she had seen the same vision with deformed dragons and wolves. Oswell might reject prophecy and mythology, but Daenerys did not. And neither could Jon. He remembered being a young boy playing in the catacombs under Winterfell and hearing the ancient kings of Winter tell him that he didn't belong, that he wasn't a Stark. At the time, he had thought it guilt because his birth as a Snow had dishonored his father. The very name Benjen had become a joke in the Seven Kingdoms. But now he wondered whether his own Targaryen blood ran true and whether the visions had been trying to guide him to the truth. "He can come," Jon said. "But do not expect me to seek counsel from either you or your god." "Excellent," Thoros said loudly. "My counsel is suspect at best, and as long as I have a full wineskin and a dry bunk, I am only minimally interested in what my god has to say." "That makes you a poor priest," Daenerys said. "On the contrary," he answered, "I believe a priest who admits his own ignorance is the best sort of priest. I've seen far too many followers of Varla convinced of their own authority, and I shall not follow their example." He took the wineskin from his belt and drank again. Jon turned to Oswyl. "Do we have a bunk for him?" Oswyl stared at him incredulously before sighing. "He can bunk with the Dothraki or on deck." Thoros turned his attention to the nearest Dothraki, easily identified by his clothing. "Do you like to drink and tell stories?" he asked. The Dothraki looked to Daenerys, who translated. After she did, the Dothraki's smile made his answer clear. Thoros frowned. "The language might be a bit of a problem, but I've overcome worse." He picked up a bag and headed toward the ship while the Dothraki in question shouted something to his fellows. Jon looked at Daenerys. "They will see him to a bunk," she said. "Your Graces, we should board," Oswyl said. "The docks grow too crowded for my comfort." As the sun rose, merchants and sailors and carts crowded docks, and that left strangers pressing closer despite the presence of Dothraki, who generally kept others away. Jon said. He held out an arm for his aunt. "Shall we board?" She smiled at him and took his arm, which allowed Balerion to shift so that he rested one foot on Dany's shoulder and one on Jon's. He shifted most of his weight to Jon, leaving him to strain to hold the dragon's weight. Soon the creatures would be too large to act like pets. They seemed to be growing faster than the historical accounts he remembered from the dance. In those records, it seemed as if Rhaenyra's children had dragons that grew much slower. Then again, Jon wasn't sure how much they could trust historians who had clearly sided with high towers. And then there'd been the purges, as Baelor the Blessed eliminated most of Targaryen history to destroy the last knowledge of the 14 Flames. He'd overseen the death of the very last Valyrian priest and the burning of large numbers of books. Jon resented that loss of knowledge now. They could not go to Dragonstone and look up whether the dragons were growing too fast, even if the island were not in Baratheon hands. But he kept his observations on the dragons to himself as he escorted Daenerys up the plank and into the sole cabin they would share, Oswyl, Jon, Daenerys and the dragons. At one point, Jon's ancestors could have commanded fleets. Now they could scarcely afford one ship large enough to transport their household and guards. Thoros followed behind Oswyl. "So where are we sailing?" Dorne, Jon answered. "Ah." Thoros appeared confused by this answer, and Jon glanced over his shoulder at the priest. He shrugged. "I just saw a lot of fog." "Dorne isn't known for fog." "Do you suggest that we set our course according to your visions?" Oswyl demanded. "Of course not. I don't set my drinking schedule according to my visions," he answered. "The fog I saw could have been a sandstorm. Or maybe fog simply means that I was truly drunk and not seeing my vision clearly." "Chart your course." "Dorne it is." He paused. "Why are we going to Dorne?" They'd reached the deck, and Dany sent Balerion into the sky as she followed two maids to the cabin she would share with Jon and Oswyl. The maids along with the rest of the household would all be sleeping on floors or in narrow sailors' bunks or in cloth strung between rafters. Jon and Dany would get a bed and Oswald the section of floor and a pillow to himself. Sometimes Jon found humor in the fact that all of these people treated him as though he were king when he felt like little more than a pauper trying to get himself home. Dorne was Arthur Dayne's choice. We shall return his sword and speak to the Dayne family about the politics of the Martells. Jon knew they had been sending money for the support of the Viserys and Dany, but now that one was dead and the other had been taken to wife by a Dothraki, he did not know where they stood. Doran Martell had both a daughter who could have married Viserys and a son who could have married Daenerys. If they were hoping to retake the throne, either in the name of the Targaryen or Martell family, recent events had ruined their plans. John was less certain of their welcome than Arthur had been. "I suppose that's as good a place to start as any," Thoros agreed. "God knows you'll be a better king than that cunt Joffrey." He and his mother made a right mess out of King's Landing. The second Tywine left to lead the Westerland's host. "What armies have been fielded?" Oswell asked, not hiding his eagerness to understand the military situation in Westeros. "Most of the Stormlands and part of the Crownlands rose for Renly. Driftmark and some of the Stormlands and a small portion of the Reach have answered Stannis' call. But most of the Reach remains silent and unmoved. The Vale is equally quiet. They say Jon Arryn died and some minor lord has risen in Lady Arryn's favor. Bronze Jon and all his knights hold the pass through the Mountains of the Moon, but they are not marching south." "And the north?" Jon asked. "He should care about all the kingdoms. The whole advantage of the Targaryen rule, or one of them at least, was that they were not tied too closely to any one kingdom, giving them more impartiality. However, Jon would always be a son of the north. He would not feign otherwise." Thoros looked at him, and something pained crossed his expression. "Lord Stark is being held against the good behavior of the north. Some say Tywine ordered it and some say Joffrey. But your cousin Robb is now acting warden of the north and he has done nothing except close the neck. So the war is between the Lannisters and Baratheons," Oswell said. "For now," Thoros said. "Men always seek advantage in war, and the Reach will come in when they decide who will benefit them the most." "The same for the Vale." "And the Riverlands?" Jon asked. Castle Lyanna was geographically closer to the Riverlands than the north, and he felt a kinship with those lords whose castles were far too exposed if the battle turned northward. "So far they are silent," Thoros said. "They say the passage across the Twins has become exponentially more expensive and Old Walder has his archers target anyone who tries to bypass him to use Castle Lyanna's crossing. But there is little else known in the Riverlands." That likely meant that Jon's secret had not yet been revealed. Had been, Tywine Lannister would have led his host straight up the King's Road and tried to take the north while Uncle Ned was still captive. "What excuse do they give for holding Lord Stark?" "None at all," Thoros said easily. "They've published that Lord Stark is being feted, but none save the most foolish believe." "The time will come soon," Oswell said softly. "The realm will need to unite, and you will need to present yourself as an alternative to Joffrey." His words were for Jon. Oswell knew that Jon was still uneasy about the obligations placed on him by his blood. But Thoros answers. "Jon must challenge either Renly or Stannis, because none but a fool will side with Joffrey. The day I left, he had the Gold Cloaks round up 500 random men, ordering them hanged and their heads put on spikes because commoners flung dung at him. He had a young maiden's head put on a spike for crying out in court that he had deflowered her. The whores whisper that his greatest pleasure is to kill and maim. All of King's Landing holds its breath. There would have been a general revolt and commoners would have torn the Red Keep down stone by stone already if it were not for the machinations of Queen Cersei and fear of the return of Lord Tywine. If Tywine falls in this war, the commoners will welcome either Stannis or Renly. They will care not which rides through the gates. If you wish to be king, focus on the Baratheons." Oswell nodded slowly, but Jon did not know that he wanted to claim power from either Baratheon. He knew his uncle Ned respected Stannis, and while he had not heard much of Renly outside his success on the tourney field, Jon did not want to war with a man of honor who could lead the kingdom. Perhaps he would be better served by turning his attention north as his uncle Ned always told him to. They watched as sailors secured the Dothraki horses and the last of their household goods before unfurling the sails. All three dragons took to the sky, but a servant had to fetch Dany when Rhaegal breathed fire on a sail and refused to listen to Jon's commands. He tried to ignore Dany as well, but then Balerion flew, slamming into his smaller brother. That was the most exciting thing to happen until a group of ships sailed at them from the west, each flying a black flag with a gold harpy. Sailors cried out and the captain came to the deck, but none of them could do anything as they were surrounded. Chapter 28. Notes. I had hoped to put out 4 chapters as my present to everyone, but the older I get, the slower I write. But this has given me joy this Christmas and I hope you have enjoyed it as well. This is the last one today, but it is the third, so read them in order. Chapter text. "We need to know what's going on in there," Sir Jaime said as their small band looked over the hill toward White Harbor. "I disagree," said the Karstark boy who had come with them. Brian thought his name was Gage Snow, but she wasn't sure. Most of these men worked hard to avoid interacting with her, so she had never been introduced to him. "We should report back to Castle Lionel or Winterfell," he told Sir Jaime. Sir Jaime scoffed. "We already knew something was wrong. If we report back now, we have nothing to tell them other than what they already know." Had Sir Jaime Lannister been a simple master of arms, he never would have dreamed of going beyond the mandate his lord had given him. But as much as Sir Jaime denied his status as heir and future lord of Casterly Rock, he still behaved like one. It was strange. He was an honorable man who had fought to protect Prince Rhaegar's family even from his own father, yet he carried as much arrogance as his father. Or at least as much as her own father had always attributed to Lord Tywin, who he had not respected or liked. "What would you have us do?" Brian asked. For her, it was a matter of doing what was honorable. These people had been invaded, the women raped, the men murdered in cold blood. She trusted Sir Jaime to choose the most honorable path, even if she feared his arrogance would lead them down a dangerous one. "I'm going down there," Sir Jaime said. "They won't touch me because I'm a Lannister, and I can tell them that I am looking for Myrcella and Tommen." They had found those two on the road to Moat Cailin. They had escorted them to safety, killing a Lannister patrol on the road. Brian admired Princess Myrcella, who had guided her brother safely most of the way along the road. Whatever they had seen had left Tommen shaken and silent, but Myrcella had a fire in her that made Brian remember her lessons on the various families. Baratheons had more Targaryen blood than any other house. They had been founded by a Targaryen bastard, and whatever they had seen had brought out the fire and blood Myrcella had in her. Tommen was far more brittle. When they had stripped the bodies of the Lannisters they had killed on the road, Myrcella had watched with furious satisfaction while Tommen had hidden behind the horses. Brian felt neither satisfaction nor horror at seeing their enemies die. She suspected someone in the north was assisting the Lannisters because the dead men wore furs under their armor like a northern men would. Brian had never known anyone south of the neck to wear furs inside the armor. Fur was expensive, and it was always worn as a cape or some other outer garment that a gentleman could use to show off his wealth. Southerners did not stitch together low-quality furs from rabbits or weasels as undergarments. But she had kept her own counsel. Her observations were not evidence, and these northern men she traveled with would take offense if a southern woman suggested that someone in the north had been disloyal. "You cannot go alone." Brian was determined on that point. Sir Jaime had been alone in the Red Keep and he had failed in his mission to protect Prince Rhaegar's family. He likely would have been captured by Lord Tywin and dragged back to Casterly Rock were it not for the appearance of Ned Stark. And perhaps Sir Jaime understood that. Perhaps that explained his loyalty to the North. But now Ned Stark was held captive in the Red Keep, and Lord Robb was barely a man. There would be no rescue if the Lannisters decided to act dishonorably. "I shall go with you," she said. He turned on her with unvarnished horror in his face. "You shall not. You know what these men have done." Brian did. She had seen the weeping daughters of crofters and the massacred bodies of farmers. "They will underestimate me because I am a woman, and if I am with you, any reputation you might have to hold sway with them would protect me as well." Brian knew she was risking her life and honor. These men might feel no obligation to Sir Jaime whatsoever, and if that was true, then they would both be in grave danger. But she would not allow Sir Jaime to walk into town with no one to watch his back. Nor would she allow him to arrogantly walk into a situation without considering the possibility that his father had ordered the men to capture him. He glared at her, but Brian stared back at him unmoved. "And what shall I tell them? What would be my reason for traveling unescorted with a young woman? Tell them I am your squire or that my father hired you to teach me the sword." Only one of those was true, but telling them that she was a squire would provide more protection than a simple matter of hire. Especially since Tarth was deep in Baratheon territory. From what she had heard, Renly had been routed quite decisively, but not before his war-hardened knights had inflicted serious damage on the Lannisters. Brian wondered if her own father was among those riding to war, slogging through the mud. She wondered if her father ever seen one of his soldiers rape a woman. Those were thoughts she did not like to indulge in often. "You are not coming with me," Sir Jaime said firmly. "You cannot stop me." "I will order these men to keep you here," Sir Jaime said. "Yet I am a better swordsman than any of them." I do wonder how many would be wounded if they attempted to lay a hand on me. Brian rested her hand on the end of her sword and stared at Sir Jaime calmly. He was attempting to be honorable, but his arrogance would see him killed or imprisoned by his father. If having Brian under his auspices forced him to consider his options with more care, then it was worth the danger. "My lord, we would struggle to restrain the Lady Brian," one of the other men said. Sir Jaime winced at being called a lord, as he always did. For a man who believed in honor, he was a contradiction. Honor would have him obeying his father, yet he rejected his inheritance. Honor would have been fighting to keep his white cloak, yet he had walked away from King Robert the moment he was given the option. And despite that, it was clear that honor drove him more than anything else. If only his common sense were as well developed. "This is not a game we are playing," Sir Jaime said. "I am going in there to get information on fortifications and units. If they realize I'm spying, they will capture you and rape me, likely killing me afterwards and placing my head on a pike," Brian said. When she had decided to pursue the sword over the needle, she had made her peace with the danger she would face. "I believe that is the same fate I would suffer were I to be found protecting the neck." "You are a great fool," Sir Jaime snapped. "I might be, but I am one you have no power to stop from following you," Brian said calmly. Sir Jaime gritted his teeth so hard that his jaw bulged, but he turned and stomped rather inelegantly back to the horses, his armor clanking in a way that was not wise given the precariousness of their situation. Brian followed much more quietly, mounting her own horse and guiding him after Sir Jaime's. Sir Jaime gave her one last venomous look before he proceeded to ignore her entirely. That was fine. Brian had been treated far worse in her life, so Sir Jaime Lannister's disdain did not sting. Sir Jaime had left his fur cloak behind any road carrying a Lannister shield they had stripped from a knight along the road. They had not even reached the first house of White Harbor before a patrol rode up on them fast, swords drawn. Brian glanced at Sir Jaime, but he rested his hand on his sword without removing it from the scabbard. "Halt. Identify yourself," a man with a scarred face demanded. Sir Jaime swept his ornate helmet from his head and rested it on the pommel in front of him. "I should be asking you to identify yourselves. I am clearly Sir Jaime Lannister, eldest son of Tywin Lannister. I've received word that my niece and nephew are missing and I have come here in search of information so that I might know which direction to search. Who is the officer in command?" Brian had always seen arrogance as a flaw, but she now saw how much power it held. Several of the men sheathed their swords immediately and others glanced nervously between their officer and Sir Jaime, clearly unwilling to engage if this was the Lannister heir. But the officer was less impressed. "And who is this? Is this another Lannister we should obey?" He gestured towards Brian. Sir Jaime snorted. "Does she carry the features of my father or my sister the Queen? Does she have green eyes? She's obviously not a Lannister. She is Brian, the lady daughter of Lord Selwyn Tarth, and she is my betrothed. Speak to her with respect or you shall not have a tongue to speak at all." His voice had grown cold and deadly and several of the men reined in their horses to leave more space between them. But Brian was too shocked to say anything. Sir Jaime had claimed her as a betrothed. It was ridiculous. Sir Jaime Lannister would never fall in love with someone like her, rejecting better marriages in favor of a lady he adored, nor was Tarth wealthy enough or powerful enough to warrant a political marriage. It was stupid lie, one they would see through with no effort. Lord Tywin Lannister's son betrothed to that creature. The officer turned his head as though to look at his fellow soldiers and share some great joke, but Sir Jaime moved so fast Brian could barely register the action. He kicked his horse, and it lunged forward. In one motion, Sir Jaime drew his sword and beheaded the officer and then he stopped, horses neighing uneasily as the officer's body slid from his horse in slow motion to join the head on the ground. Sir Jaime smiled at the rest of the men. "I did issue a warning. Now, who is the officer I can speak to about my missing niece and nephew and who might have seen them last? I also need information on anyone who has left White Harbor since the Lannisters took control and which members of the Marndale family remain. And if any of you think that I would choose some delicate, useless bauble like Marjorie Tyrell over a woman strong enough to ride and fight at my side, then you clearly do not know me. So let me introduce myself. I am Sir Jaime Lannister, the youngest knight to ever take a white cloak. I killed Gregor Clegane and Amory Lorque. I am a master at arms of great renown, and people from Essos travel to train with me. And the next one who insults my future wife shall have a more difficult death. Understood? He snapped out the last word sharply enough to make the men jump. He got several affirmative answers. He stared at the men, silently judging them long enough that several appeared poised to flee. Only then did he smile coldly. Now that introductions have been made, let's go to Newcastle so I can begin my search for my family. He reined his horse around the decapitated body, and Brian followed, still shocked, into silence. The ride into town was silent. Merchants and fishermen and children watched them pass, a horrific silence filling the air. All of White Harbor seemed to be waiting, although Brian did not know what it was waiting for. She rode the hand on her sword, expecting the soldiers around them to attack at any moment. The guard that rode next to Sir Jaime guided them to an elaborate home where Lannister guards in red lined the walls. Sir Jaime got off his horse and handed the reins to the soldier without glancing back towards Brian, but she could do nothing but follow his lead now that he had begun this ridiculous ruse. He had chosen this story to torture her, she knew it. He was not as cruel in his jests as Tyrion, but he still had a streak of malice. She gave her horse's reins over and followed Sir Jaime, still expecting ambush at any moment. Sir Jaime appeared unconcerned as he strode through corridors and asked servants for directions. They had not reached the solar where they had been sent before a man met them in the hallway. "Sir Jaime, this is unexpected," he said. "Really? Because you failed to secure my niece or my nephew? Is it so unexpected that I would receive a message about your incompetence? I want to know who last saw Myrcella and Tommen. I want them brought to me. I want a list of every person who has left the city since you took it, and a list of every Marndaeli and every Marndaeli soldier still alive in the city, and I want these things now. I need to know what direction to search since you have managed to bungle the situation." This captain was not as impressed by Sir Jaime's arrogance as the common soldiers had been. He studied Sir Jaime before his gaze slid to Brian. "The last I heard you served Lord Stark of Castle Lyanna. The last I heard, my sister Queen Cersei asked me to protect Tommen and Myrcella when their father sent them north. Should we send ravens to Cersei and ask her whether I should be searching for my niece and nephew or whether you have the authority to get between me and my duty?" The captain blanched. Brian was not used to men invoking the name of a woman, but Cersei did seem to inspire fear. Sir Jaime looked at the captain contemptuously. "Let us start with something easy. How many Marndaelis remain alive?" For a moment, the captain stared at him, but then he said slowly, "Lady Leona, Sir Wendell, Lord Willis, the Lord of White Harbor, and his two daughters Winifred and Wylla." Brian fought to keep her face impassive. The man referred to Willis as the Lord, but that should be Wyman. He had visited Tarth once when she'd been young, and she remembered him as a happy man who laughed a lot. He had not made fun of Brian when, as a child, she had told him she wanted to learn to swing a sword. He told her she should come north to find a husband capable of appreciating a woman who knew how to wield a weapon. He had been old, but Brian refused to believe that it was coincidence that age had killed him when Lannisters had taken his city. "I will see Willis and his two daughters in the Lord's Solar. You will relocate elsewhere until such time I leave. You have 4 hours to get me lists of who has left the city and which loyalist soldiers are still within these walls." Sir Jaime strode past the captain without even asking his name, and to Brian's surprise, his arrogance prevailed. The captain moved to the side of the hallway and offered Sir Jaime a nod, although his expression was less respectful when his eyes landed on her. Brian ignored him and followed Sir Jaime. 2 guards stood on either side of the door and both dropped hands to sword hilt as Sir Jaime strode up, but he didn't even slow. "Do not bother me unless it is Lord Willis who I have sent for or his daughters or unless your captain has come with the lists I ordered him to procure." By the time he finished saying as much, he was already past the guards and into the office. He stood at the door waiting until Brian entered, before he closed the door firmly and all of the arrogance vanished in a breath, replaced by relief. So he had not been as confident as he had feigned. "You're betrothed?" Brian demanded. There were far more important issues to sort, but those are the words that slipped out. Sir Jaime gave her a crooked smile. "It's either you or Margaery Tyrell who has been trying to tempt me into a marriage bed ever since we met." Besides, no man would touch another man's betrothed unless he was particularly interested in having his balls, his head, or both removed from his body. Now we have a limited amount of time and we need to look through these papers. I need anything that will tell us troop strength or the names of the officers. Brian went to the desk and started unrolling parchments one at a time, careful to not disturb any organizational system the captain might be using. She always kept some parchment in her own inner pouch, and she removed it so she could take notes. Sir Jamie worked on his side of the desk just as quickly and carefully. Gods old and new, Sir Jamie cursed quietly. Brian had been re-rolling an uninteresting missive regarding the importation of grain, but she turned her attention to Sir Jamie. He held up a small scroll with the Lannister seal on it. My father has a secret arrangement with Lord Bolton. Bolton. That alarmed her. He fielded the third largest host after Stark and Umber and was the fourth wealthiest seat after Stark, Marndale, and Whale Song. Lord Stark needs to know. Lord Stark is captive in King's Landing, Jamie said, his voice distant as though he were thinking too hard to speak with confidence. And yet Lord Robb holds Winterfell and Lord Benjen, Castle Lionel. They both need to know. Sir Jamie nodded. That is more important than freeing White Harbor. They returned the desk to its previous arrangement before Sir Jamie sat behind it and rubbed a hand over his face. That traitorous son of a sea serpent. I trained his heir. I've trained his men. I will see them all dead for this betrayal and their heads on spikes. Brian thought the men had very little control over the actions of their lords, but she would not be averse to seeing Lord Bolton's head on a stake. Maybe we could convince Benjen to take up the old Stark practice of bleeding their enemies on the weirwood trees, she suggested. Jamie gave her a devilish smile, but then he sighed with exaggerated sorrow. I don't think he would approve. But he will die. No doubt Bolton thinks the Starks are vulnerable because my father holds Lord Stark, but he will suffer before I allow him to die. There was a fury in Jamie's voice that Brian wasn't used to hearing. Brian felt a touch of sympathy for Bolton. He thought his perfidy was well hidden, but he was going to learn that what happened in the dark, the Seven often brought to the light. Before either of them could say more, someone knocked, and two guards escorted a large man with Lord Wyman's broad nose, but this one was much younger and leaner, although most would still call him an exceptionally large individual. Sir Jamie stood. Lord Willis, he greeted him. Lord Willis was in chains, and Lannister guards held his arms. Willis sneered at Sir Jamie. Have you run back to your father and betrayed the Starks? I have no interest in any conflict between Lannisters and Starks, Sir Jamie said in a dismissive tone. However, my niece and nephew are missing. You know as well as I that now is not the time for innocent maidens and children to be wandering the countryside. If you sent them to some safe harbor, I need to know where. I give you my word that my only interest is ensuring that my family members are safe. You wear Lannister colors when Lannisters attacked by night and killed my father. Willis sneered. I am not interested in your definition of honor. The door was still open, so there was no knock when Willis's daughters appeared. The elder was a beauty with brown hair braided with pearls, and at her side stood a tall man with broad shoulders in the livery of House Tyrell. Sir Garland, I am surprised to meet you here, Sir Jamie said with the same sort of gentility two men might use when meeting one another at a feast at a third man's house. Garland narrowed his eyes and put a hand on Winifred's arm. Where else should I be but by the side of my wife, he asked. Sir Jamie smiled broadly. Congratulations. I had not thought the Queen of Thorns willing to send her seed so far, but I know you will have a good marriage. Can I introduce my own betrothed, Brienne of Tarth? Sir Jamie gestured to her, and the suspicious expression on Garland's face was replaced by confusion. But manners won out. He turned to Brian and bowed. Congratulations, my lady. May you have a long and prosperous marriage. Brian was caught for a moment between the urge to curtsy and the urge to bow. Neither would be entirely appropriate given the way she was dressed and her sex. So she did neither. This jest was dishonorable, but she nodded since she could not contradict Jamie when surrounded by Lannisters. Thank you, Sir Garland. And congratulations to you, Lady Winifred. The younger Marndale was dressed more plainly and was clutching a shawl about her tightly. Her hair was stained with green, but there was something in her eyes that chilled Brian. This girl had not escaped the horrors her sister had. In that moment, Brian knew hatred. If she could burn every Lannister soldier out of the world with a single word, she would utter it without doubt. Lord Willis's youngest daughter was far too young for these horrors, and her hands clutched her shawl until her knuckles turned white. My Lady Brianna greeted her. "Good day to you, ladies," Sir Jaime said in his most courtly voice, and the girl gave a full-body shudder. Brian saw a flash of fury in Sir Jaime's eyes before all emotion vanished, and he turned back to her Lord Father. "Do you have any information on where my niece and nephew might have gone?" Willis drew himself up straighter. "I do not." From the way he braced himself, he expected the questions to turn sharp, but Sir Jaime nodded. "I may need to send riders out in several directions if we can't find better information." Sir Jaime turned to Brian and smiled. "I know you are a wonderful horsewoman, but I also know you do enjoy some parts of the more ladylike pleasures. Perhaps you may go with Lord Willis's daughters and they can show you where you may bathe and get out of your armor for a time. We'll not be leaving until tomorrow at the earliest, possibly the day after." Brian was tempted to object that she should stay at his side. If she left, he had no one to watch his back. But that was not the role of a betrothed. Sir Jaime's lie had not just protected her, it had trapped her into this role, but Brian could only smile and nod her head. "Of course, my lord." "My ladies, would you have quarters for me near your own?" "Of course," Winifred said with a strained smile, but Wyler just stared at her. "I shall escort you," Garland said firmly, glaring at the Lannisters before he held out one arm for Winifred and one for Wyler. "I regret, my lady, that I do not have a third arm for you," Garland said. "Quite all right. I find that taking a man's arm slows me when I intend to draw my sword," Brian said with a smile. Maybe Sir Jaime would cast her as the woman to be sheltered under a betrothal contract, but she would remind them that she could wield the sword as well as any man. Garland's eyebrows rose. "Then you are a unique woman, indeed. Follow us, my lady." Garland led them out of the office and Brian followed with one last look toward Jaime. 2 Lannister guards trailed behind them, but Garland kept up a steady conversation on the merits of White Harbor versus Highgarden the whole way to another part of the palace. He stopped outside a door and said, "Winifred is staying here with her sister during these challenging times. I will call a servant to prepare the room next door." A narrow bed like a servant might use stood in the hallway, but it was covered in furs and finely loomed blankets like no servant would use. Garland had been sleeping outside their room. Brian smiled at him. "Thank you." She turned to the ladies. "I fear that when we travel, I do not have the necessities ladies require. May I come into your room with you and request your assistance?" Brian asked the 2 sisters. Garland took a breath as though he were going to object, but then Winifred put a hand on his arm and he quieted. "Of course," Winifred said, "please come in." "Garland, would you please have a servant prepare the room next door?" "Of course," Garland said. "My ladies." He bowed to them before striding to the end of the hallway, but he did not turn the corner and seek out a servant. Instead he stood and watched them as they entered the door. Wyler immediately barred the door and let out a breath. Wary of eavesdroppers, Brian moved closer to Winifred and whispered, "Sir Jaime is still in service to the Starks. We are here to get information on defenses and how we might retake White Harbor," she said. The Lannisters had hurt Wyler in a way that no man would ever understand, and so Brian knew these 2 would never betray them. "Truly?" Wyler asked, her voice sharp. "Yes," Brian said. "When we lost contact, we knew something was wrong, but we did not know what. There is a small group of men waiting in the hills to carry word back to the other lords." Brian did not mention the more critical assignment to get word of Lord Bolton's perfidy to the others. "I want to kill them all," Wyler said. Her sister gave her a sympathetic look before turning back to Brian. "How can we help?" Brian pulled out another piece of parchment from her pouch. Illiterate men made fun of her for wasting space on such supplies, but she found them more valuable than any other tool she might choose to carry. "I need to sketch the defensive positions. I will ensure that only Benjen Stark or Robb Stark sees it, but it will be invaluable in helping us plan a counterattack." Winifred took the parchment from her. "I am my father's heir, so he has made me learn many things, including our defensive capabilities." Wyler's hand shot out, and she grabbed Brian's arm. "Poison," she said in a fierce voice. "What?" Brian asked. Wyler laughed, the voice cruel and brittle. Poison their mead. They will think it an illness when it sends them all to the privy, and it will weaken them so that they are not able to defend themselves as well. It will save northern lives. But we are too well guarded. Any poison I put in the mead now would have cleared their system before the Stark army arrives. It will be of no use, Brian said. No, Wyler said. Penny hopes. Winifred sucked in a startled breath. Brian looked from one to the other. What is that? Winifred answered. The men will sometimes brew it when there is no ale available, but unlike ale or mead which improves as it sets, penny hops become more poisonous over time. The hops are never totally emptied because that improves the flavor, but if you get enough penny hops into the batch, it will poison them slowly and the effects will grow more pronounced over time. The weakest among them will have an upset stomach or some dizziness. 3 weeks and they will be visiting the privy far too often and will start suffering. A month in, she paused to look at her sister. Men will start dying. Lannisters will start dying. They offer no mead to any of ours. And if any of ours die, it means that they were cooperating with those monsters. Wyler's face was twisted with hatred. Where can I find penny hopes? Brian asked. This was a mission that could save lives, and while it might cost her hers, she would not quail out of fear. Winifred stared at her for a moment before something like determination crossed her face. Let us get you dressed like a lady. Then it would be proper for Garland to escort you on a tour. He is very fond of the gardens, and you would be surprised at how much one may hide in a pouch properly tucked within voluminous skirts. She hurried to her wardrobe. From there, I know a servant who will be happy to do the deed. Wyler's smile was vicious. When Brian had decided that she needed to fight for the innocent, to even kill for them, she always seen herself with a sword in hand. Not poison. Poison was a coward's weapon. But then again, these Lannisters were cowards. What they had done to Wyler, what they would do to every woman given the opportunity, was nothing more than cowardice. They deserved no better death than while sitting in a privy and shitting themselves. A messenger appeared in the command tent, a cool autumn breeze blowing in when he lifted the flap. Lord Tywine, we have received word from White Harbor. Tywine rubbed a hand over his face. Sometimes he wondered if he should have strangled Cersei before leaving the capital. Kevan was a good man, but he did not know how to handle her venom, and invading the north had her fingerprints on it. King Joffrey was too much a fool to bother writing orders. Kevan could keep him busy for the cost of a few whores, but Cersei was becoming a problem. What has happened? If the gods favored him, someone would have found his missing grandson and granddaughter. Jaime and Robb Stark led a counter-attack that retook the city. Of course they did, Tywine said dryly. If only Cersei were here, he could expound on the inevitability of that loss. Only a fool believed they could hold the north against Starks, but apparently his daughter was a fool. His grandson sitting on that ugly throne was a worse one, but at least he had no delusions of competence. Joffrey threw his fits and demanded people bow to him, and then he returned to his room to eat sweets and hire lickspittles to praise him. This invasion had Cersei's arrogance writ in ink. Is there any word of Myrcella or Tommen? None, my lord. And the attack exposed the Boltons as our allies. Tywine kept his face passive even though he wanted to scream. He had carefully tended that alliance after Stark had foolishly given him the key to the north. He'd said Bolton was of a like mind as Tywine. And he was. He had been helping Tywine quietly move in the north, silently preparing to reclaim Myrcella and Tommen at a time advantageous to them. But now it was all exposed. The Boltons were not strong enough to stand against the Starks, no matter what Roose Bolton said, and now Tywine had not only the Baratheon idiots but also the Starks to fight while the Reach remained so cautious that they refused to move at all. Olenna had one grandson in Renly's camp and another married to a Marndale girl, so she could not move in any direction without cutting off family. The Vale was in disarray after Jon Arryn's recent death, and Dorne was as absent as ever. When he had set off with an army to deal with Baratheons, he had not expected his greatest foes to be inside his own family. But what should have been a quick and decisive victory was becoming something more difficult to navigate. Any other word? Tywine asked, silently vowing to kill this messenger if he revealed one more piece of idiocy from his daughter. No, my lord. Tywine waved the messenger away. He needed to get Cersei out of King's Landing. He could take her back to Casterly Rock, but he didn't want her free to scheme. She needed a husband, someone who could take control of her. Garland Tyrell would have been ideal. Olenna would have kept Cersei on a short leash, but he was tied to the Mandaelis now. With the heir being a girl, he would inherit, and the Tyrells would have a valuable new asset. Given that Lannister soldiers had attacked Garland's good family, all Tyrells were unavailable now. Tully was no good. They had close marriage ties with the Starks. The Stormlands and Crownlands were full of those taking sides with one of the Baratheon idiots against King Joffrey, which left few options. He might marry her to a Lannister bannerman or try to use her for an alliance in Dorne. In truth, marrying her to a savage in the far south appealed to him right now. But she was his daughter. She was the last piece of Joanna he had. He owed it to his late wife to find her a good match. Sir Eldrick Sarsfield perhaps. Or Desmond Crickehall. But he had to find someone. She would lose this war for them if he left her near power. He stood and went to one of his lieutenants standing guard on his command tent. Send word to the captains that they are to hold positions. I am riding back to King's Landing and Kevin will be joining you in the field. Tywine had foolishly thought the battlefield the more dangerous territory, but he was wrong. Kevan could handle Stannis with his foreign gods and Renly with his foppishry. Tywine was needed to handle his idiot daughter before she united all the other kingdoms against them. Chapter 29, Astapor. Chapter text. Jon followed the others into the broad square. Soldiers stood in lines, their dark armor dull even in the morning sun. So these were the Unsullied. Jon was disgusted by what the masters did to create these soldiers. They took these men's manhoods, gelding them so completely that they were sexless. And maybe it was because of his own close relationship with Ghost, a relationship that had not weakened despite their distance, but Jon was revolted by what these men had been forced to do to their beloved companions. The masters gave each boy a puppy to raise, to train, to teach, and no one told them that at the end of the year, the boy would have to kill the animal that had cuddled with him when he had mourned the loss of his family, his freedom, his manhood. He would have to stab the dog he had taken pride in training. Jon wondered how much of themselves the Unsullied killed on that day and how many of the boys chose the second path. An Unsullied who failed to kill his own companion would be tossed to feral dogs so that they would be torn to pieces with their companion dying at their side. It was monstrous. Jon hated these masters in a way that he had never before felt hate. Walder Free might be dishonorable and disgustingly loathsome, but he could not imagine Lord Walder doing anything this horrific. Daenerys walked several steps ahead of him, which made Jon uncomfortable. His aunt was too vulnerable in the lead that way, but when their ship had been boarded, it was clear that the master knew of Drago's death and Dany's dragons. They either didn't know or didn't care about her nephew, so Jon remained in the shadows as they invited Dany to come to Astapor to meet with the city masters. Given the number of ships that had escorted them here, the invitation had not been something they could turn down. But he was painfully aware that if one of these masters ordered the Unsullied to attack, the Targaryen line would end here in Astapor. Daenerys stopped in front of the dais where several men sat and drank wine and were fed fruit by scantily clad slaves. They were monsters, weak monsters who could not even care for themselves. "Who do I have the pleasure of meeting?" Daenerys asked as she looked up at the men. A girl of no more than 9 or 10 with dark skin and tightly curled hair leaned close and spoke in Valyrian. "This is the one the Great Master sent for." "Yes, the dragon bitch." The man leered at Dany. "I expected her to walk differently after having horsecock shoved up her cunt." Jon watched Daenerys, but she had not so much as twitched at the insult. "Welcome her." The girl translated, "The Master Krasnys welcomes the wife of the Khal and the owner of the 3 dragons." She glanced up where the 3 dragons circled in the sky. The men who had intercepted their ship had insisted the dragons should be chained, but Dany had parroted Jon's words on the matter. Jon could not imagine ever chaining Ghost, and he felt the same about the dragons. She had told them that she would not chain an animal that was born and lived free. "I was sailing to Dorne with my companions and my dragons." "For what purpose have you interfered with my travel?" Daenerys asked. The dark-skinned girl translated accurately. One of the other masters spoke before Krasnys could. "We control what happens in Slavers Bay. Who is this bitch to question us?" Enough, Krasny said, she has dragons. And while her cunt is well used, it will be warm enough to sell. Beside John, Oswald tensed. Krasny's turned to the girl. Tell her we want to know about dragons. Master Krasny's asks for information about dragons, about how they have been born into the world again, she said in common. Dany had been raised in Essos, and she was the embodiment of Valyrian beauty. Why did this idiot assume she could not speak her native language? Daenerys looked at each of the masters before she answered. A dragon calls to dragons. Blood calls to blood. But I would travel back to Westeros. I would ask that you release my ship so that I can continue my journey home. Master Krasny laughed when he heard that translation. The bitch thinks she can take advantage of their war in the west. We are more likely to conquer Westeros than she is. The other masters laughed along with him. He waved a dismissive hand toward the translator and